Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'm doing something a little different to help us all wind down after what's probably been a long week. I've been scrolling through Reddit and found this treasure trove of stories about the weirdest, most random ways couples actually met each other. Some of these are so absurd they sound made up, but honestly, real life is stranger than fiction most of the time. Before we start, comment below where in the world you're watching the video from. It's always fun to see where the algorithm puts my videos. Anyway, grab whatever, get comfortable, and let's dive into some stories that'll make you believe in fate, coincidence, or just pure chaos leading to happily ever after. Let's start with this first story that honestly sounds like it came straight out of a romantic comedy, except it's real life and way more chaotic. We met because he stole my parking spot. I know that sounds like the beginning of a road rage incident. Not a love story, but here we are 3 years later, and I'm married to the guy who made me absolutely furious in a Target parking lot. It was one of those busy Saturday afternoons where everyone and their mother decided they needed to go shopping at the exact same time. I'd been circling the parking lot for 15 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're running late and stressed about finding everything on your list, 15 minutes feels like forever. Finally, I spotted someone walking to their car with shopping bags. Perfect. I put on my turn signal and waited patiently while they loaded their groceries and did that thing where they sit in their car for 5 minutes, checking their phone before actually leaving. You know what I'm talking about. Everyone does it, but when you're waiting for their spot, it's the most annoying thing in the world. The car finally starts backing out, and I'm already inching forward to claim my rightfully earned parking space when this blue Honda comes flying around the corner from the opposite direction and swoops right into my spot. The spot I'd been waiting for, the spot I'd earned through patience and suffering. I was livid, absolutely seeing red. I parked behind his car so he couldn't leave and got out to confront this parking spot thief. This guy gets out of his Honda, and he's tall with dark hair and he's wearing this goofy Star Wars t-shirt, and he looks completely oblivious to the crime he just committed. "Excuse me," I said, and I'm sure my voice was dripping with the kind of fake politeness that actually means I'm about to lose my mind. I was waiting for that spot. He looked genuinely confused for a second, then his face just fell. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't see you waiting. I was coming from the other direction, and I thought it was just open." Now I was prepared for an argument. I was ready for him to be defensive or rude or to claim he got there first. What I wasn't prepared for was this immediate, sincere apology from someone who actually looked mortified that he'd stolen my parking spot. "I can move," he said. Like, right now. This is completely my fault, and something about the way he said it, how genuinely sorry he seemed, just deflated all my anger immediately. Plus, I noticed he had nice eyes, really nice eyes, which was annoying because I was trying to be mad at him. "No, it's fine," I said, even though it wasn't fine, and I was still annoyed about having to find another spot. "Just pay attention next time." "I will, I promise." I'm usually not this much of a parking lot menace. He paused, then added, "I'm Daniel, by the way." Daniel the parking spot stealer. Despite everything, I laughed. "I'm Sarah. Sarah the person who probably looks like she wants to key your car right now." "Only probably?" he asked, grinning. "I must be more charming than I thought." We ended up talking for another 10 minutes in that parking lot. He told me he was shopping for his sister's birthday and had no idea what to get her. I told him I was there for the weekly grocery run that I'd been putting off for 3 days. Normal, boring stuff, but somehow we kept talking. When I finally said I should probably go find a parking spot before the store closed, he said, "This is going to sound crazy, but would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? I promise I won't steal your table." I said yes, which surprised both of us, I think. We exchanged numbers right there between his Honda and a shopping cart someone had abandoned in the middle of the parking lot. Our first date was at a coffee shop near campus, and he showed up 15 minutes early because he was paranoid about being late after the parking lot incident. I showed up 10 minutes early because I'm always early to everything. So we both just sat there awkwardly checking our phones until we realised we were both already there. The coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into walking around downtown until midnight, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his job at a marketing firm and how he'd wanted to be a teacher, but got talked out of it by his parents. I told him about finishing my nursing degree and how I was terrified of starting my first real job at the hospital. By the end of the night, the parking lot incident had become this funny story we could laugh about instead of the moment I wanted to murder him. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Daniel would pick me up for dates and always, without fail, would circle the block twice to make sure he wasn't taking anyone else's parking spot. It became this running joke between us. He'd text me photos of empty parking spaces with captions like, "Claimed this one fairly," or "No one was waiting, I checked." 6 months later, he asked me to be his girlfriend in the same Target parking lot where we met. He'd driven us there after dinner and parked in what he claimed was the exact same spot, though I'm pretty sure it wasn't. He said he wanted to ask me somewhere meaningful to our relationship, and apparently a retail parking lot counted as meaningful. A year after that, he proposed in the same spot. I said yes while laughing at how ridiculous it was that the most important moments in our relationship kept happening next to a Target. The ring was beautiful, and I didn't even care that there were shopping carts rattling around us in the wind. We got married last spring, and Daniel's best man told everyone at the reception about how we met. The story got bigger laughs than any of the other wedding speeches, and people still bring it up whenever we see them. Our wedding favours were little keychains shaped like parking meters with Daniel and Sarah engraved on them. Now we live together in an apartment with assigned parking, so there's no more drama about who gets which spot. But Daniel still apologises every time he parks anywhere, just in case someone was waiting. It's become this weird habit that makes me fall in love with him all over again. People always say they can't believe we got married because of a parking lot fight, but honestly, I think it was the perfect way to meet. We got to see each other at our worst and most frustrated, and we still liked each other. Plus, now we have the most unique how we met story at every party we go to. That story is over. Honestly, this might be the most wholesome parking lot confrontation in human history. Most people would have just exchanged insurance information and a few choice words, but these two turned road rage into romance. The fact that he kept proposing in the same parking lot shows commitment to the bit, and I respect that level of dedication to your origin story. Speaking of unexpected grocery store encounters, this next story proves that sometimes fighting over produce can lead to something sweet. OP posted this one about meeting their partner during what they call the Great Banana War of 2019. Emma and I both grabbed the last bunch of bananas at the same time. We laughed, split them, and exchanged numbers. Now we're planning our wedding for next fall. It was a Tuesday evening, which means it was grocery shopping day, because I'm one of those people who has their life scheduled down to the hour. I'd just gotten off work and stopped at the store on my way home, armed with my colour-coded shopping list and reusable bags, because I'm environmentally conscious and slightly obsessive about organisation. The produce section was busier than usual, probably because there had been some sale advertised that I hadn't paid attention to. I was working my way through my list, grabbing apples and spinach and those overpriced organic carrots that taste exactly like regular carrots but cost twice as much. I got to the banana display, and there was exactly one bunch left. One perfect bunch of bananas that weren't too green or too spotted, just the right shade of yellow that meant they'd be good for my morning smoothies for the rest of the week. I reached for them at the exact same moment someone else did. Our hands collided over those bananas, like we were in some kind of slow-motion romantic movie, except it wasn't romantic at all. It was just awkward and slightly aggressive because we were both clearly determined to claim those bananas as our own. I looked up to see who I was fighting with and found myself staring at this woman with curly red hair and freckles, wearing scrubs like she'd just gotten off a hospital shift. She had the same determined expression I probably had, like those bananas were a matter of life and death. "I think I was here first," she said, but she was smiling when she said it, like she knew how ridiculous the whole situation was. "I'm pretty sure I was," I replied, not letting go of my end of the banana bunch, "but I'm willing to negotiate." We stood there for a few seconds, both holding on to these bananas like we were in some kind of produce standoff. Other shoppers were starting to notice, and probably wondering if they needed to call security to break up a fruit fight. Finally, she started laughing. "This is insane. We're literally fighting over bananas." "The last bananas," I corrected. "These are premium bananas, perfectly ripe bananas, the holy grail of bananas." "You're right," she said, nodding seriously. "These are clearly worth fighting for." That made me laugh, and suddenly the whole situation seemed hilarious instead of stressful. Here we were, two grown adults, having a territorial dispute over produce, like we were characters in some weird grocery store nature documentary. "Okay," I said, "what if we split them? There are like 8 bananas in this bunch. We each get 4. Everyone wins." She considered this proposal for a moment. "That's actually brilliant. A banana peace treaty." We carefully divided the bananas right there in the produce section, counting them out like we were conducting some kind of important diplomatic negotiation. She got 4, I got 4, and the Great Banana War was officially over. "I'm Emma," she said, extending her hand for a formal handshake. "Thank you for being reasonable about the banana situation." "I'm Jake," I replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for not calling security on me for banana hoarding." We started walking toward the checkout together, and I found out she was a nurse at the children's hospital downtown, which explained the scrubs and probably why she needed bananas for quick energy during long shifts. I told her I worked in graphic design and made smoothies every morning, which was why I was so invested in banana quality. By the time we got to the checkout lines, we'd been talking for 20 minutes about everything from our jobs to our favourite smoothie recipes. She mentioned that she'd been trying to eat healthier, but had no idea how to make anything that didn't come from a box or a takeout menu. "I could teach you," I offered, then immediately felt like an idiot because who offers to teach someone to cook when you've known them for half an hour? I mean, if you wanted to learn. I'm not like a professional chef or anything, but I can make things that don't burn. "That's already more than I can do," she said. "I once set off the smoke alarm making toast." We exchanged numbers while waiting in line, and she texted me before I even got to my car to thank me again for sharing the bananas. I texted back that it was the most civilized produce dispute I'd ever been part of. Our first date was me teaching her how to make a proper stir-fry in her kitchen. She'd warned me that her cooking skills were limited, but I wasn't prepared for someone who didn't know you had to peel garlic before using it. We spent 2 hours making what should have been a 30-minute meal, but we laughed through the entire process. The stir-fry turned out surprisingly good, considering Emma had never used half the vegetables we put in it. We ate it while watching Netflix on her couch, and she said it was the best meal she'd ever made, even though I'd done most of the actual cooking. After that, cooking together became our thing. I'd come over twice a week and teach her a new recipe, and she'd help by mostly staying out of the way and providing commentary on my technique. She got better over time, though she still couldn't make toast without burning it, at least a little. 6 months later, we were officially dating and splitting grocery shopping duties. Emma handled non-perishables, and I dealt with produce, because apparently I had strong opinions about fruit ripeness that she found both amusing and slightly concerning. A year after the banana incident, we moved in together and started shopping as a team. We'd joke about our meet-cute story every time we went to that grocery store, and Emma would always grab 2 bunches of bananas just to avoid any future produce conflicts. Last month, I proposed to her in the produce section of that same grocery store, right next to the banana display. The ring was hidden in a bunch of bananas that I had carefully arranged to look natural, but actually contained a small velvet box. She said yes while laughing and crying at the same time, and the produce manager came over to congratulate us and give us a discount on our groceries. We're planning our wedding for next fall, and we're seriously considering banana-themed decorations because, at this point, it would be weird not to incorporate bananas into our wedding somehow. The save the dates have a little cartoon banana on them, and our wedding cake is going to have banana layers. People always ask us how we met, and when we tell them about fighting over bananas, they think we're joking. But it's true, and it's become this perfect metaphor for our relationship. We're both stubborn and determined, but we're also willing to compromise and share when it matters. That story wraps up there. I love how they turned a potential grocery store confrontation into a cooking lesson romance. The fact that they got engaged in the same produce section where they met is peak romantic comedy material. Some people find love on dating apps, others find it while fighting over perfectly ripe bananas. Life works in mysterious ways. Our next story involves what might be the most chaotic meet-cute involving a four-legged wingman who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. I met my husband because my dog knocked him over. This sounds like the start of a lawsuit, not a love story, but apparently my golden retriever Buddy had different plans for my romantic life. It was a perfect Saturday morning at Riverside Park, and I was letting Buddy burn off some energy before we headed home. He's always been friendly, but not particularly well trained when it comes to impulse control around new people. I kept him on a long leash so he could explore, but I could still maintain some semblance of control over his enthusiasm. The park was busy with joggers, families with kids, and people walking their own dogs. Buddy was in heaven, sniffing everything and wagging his tail at every person who walked by. I was scrolling through my phone while he investigated a particularly interesting tree when I heard this commotion behind me. I turned around to see Buddy had apparently spotted someone he absolutely needed to meet immediately. The leash was pulled tight, and there was a guy on the ground, covered in grass stains, looking completely bewildered. My 80-pound golden retriever was standing over him, tail wagging like he'd just accomplished something amazing. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." I ran over, pulling Buddy back while this poor guy tried to sit up and assess the damage. "Are you hurt?" He's friendly, but he's also apparently a linebacker when he gets excited. The guy looked up at me, and I noticed he had really nice brown eyes and was trying not to laugh despite being tackled by my overgrown puppy. "I'm fine," he said, brushing grass off his shirt. "Your dog has excellent form. I think he could play professional football." "His name is Buddy, and he clearly has no concept of personal space," I said, trying to keep Buddy from jumping on him again. I swear, he's not usually this aggressive with his affection. "Well, I was just standing here minding my own business when this furry missile decided I needed to be on the ground," he said, finally getting to his feet. "I'm Noah, by the way." "Noah, the guy who just got tackled in a public park." "I'm Ashley, owner of the furry missile," I replied. "Are you sure you're okay?" "He got you pretty good." Noah looked down at his grass-stained clothes and shrugged. "Nothing that won't wash out. Although I have to say, this is definitely the most interesting thing that's happened to me all week." Buddy was still pulling toward Noah, clearly convinced they were now best friends. Every time Noah moved, Buddy would wag harder and try to follow him. It was like love at first sight, except it was my dog falling in love with a complete stranger. "He really likes you," I observed, which was an understatement. Buddy was acting like Noah was the most fascinating person he'd ever encountered. "The feeling's mutual," Noah said, reaching down to pet Buddy's head. "I've been thinking about getting a dog, but I wasn't sure I was ready for the responsibility." "Your guy here is making a pretty good case for the golden retriever breed." We ended up talking for almost an hour, while Buddy continued to shower Noah with attention. I found out Noah worked in software development and had just moved to the area for a new job. He told me about trying to find good hiking trails and coffee shops, and I ended up giving him a whole list of recommendations. "I should probably let you get back to your Saturday," I finally said, though I was enjoying our conversation way too much to want it to end. "Actually," Noah said, looking slightly nervous, "would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? I mean, after your dog basically introduced us, it seems like fate or something." I looked down at Buddy, who was sitting perfectly now, tongue hanging out, looking incredibly proud of himself. I think Buddy would be offended if I said no at this point. We exchanged numbers right there in the park, with Buddy supervising the entire process like he was some kind of canine matchmaker. Noah texted me before I even got home to make sure I'd given him the right number and to thank Buddy for the introduction. Our first official date was at a dog-friendly coffee shop because Noah insisted Buddy should be included since he was responsible for our meeting. Buddy behaved perfectly, probably because he'd already accomplished his mission of getting Noah's attention. Noah started coming to the park regularly, and Buddy would lose his mind with excitement every time he saw him approaching. It became our routine weekend mornings at the park with my overly enthusiastic wingman. 6 months later, Noah moved in with us, and Buddy finally had the full-time playmate he'd apparently been trying to acquire. Noah would joke that he'd been adopted by both of us, and honestly, that's kind of what happened. We got engaged 2 years later, and Noah proposed at the exact spot in the park where Buddy had tackled him. He said he wanted to honour the place where our love story began, even if it started with him flat on his back, covered in grass stains. Buddy was the ring bearer at our wedding, wearing a little bow tie and walking down the aisle like he knew he was the real hero of this story. The officiant mentioned in the ceremony that while some couples are brought together by mutual friends, we were brought together by a golden retriever with a talent for takedowns. We've been married for 2 years now, and Buddy still acts like he personally arranged our entire relationship. Every time we tell the story of how we met, he wags his tail like he's getting credit for his excellent work as a matchmaker. That story's over. Honestly, Buddy deserves a medal for his matchmaking services. Most dogs just steal socks or chew furniture, but this one decided to become a professional wingman. The fact that Noah kept coming back to the park specifically to see both of them shows he was clearly smitten from the start. Sometimes, the best relationships begin with someone flat on their back, wondering what just happened. Speaking of unexpected introductions, our next story proves that sometimes the universe uses fire drills as its own personal dating app. We met during a fire drill that turned out to be the least boring emergency evacuation in history. OP shared this story about how a false alarm at their office building turned into the beginning of their relationship. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was deep in spreadsheets when the fire alarm started blaring. Not the gentle beeping that means someone burnt their lunch in the office microwave, but the full-blown, ear-splitting alarm that means everyone needs to evacuate immediately. Our building has these drills pretty regularly, so nobody was particularly panicked. Just annoyed because we all had work to finish, and standing outside for 20 minutes wasn't exactly how anyone wanted to spend their afternoon. I grabbed my phone and headed for the stairwell with everyone else. The evacuation was going smoothly until we got to the lobby, where building security was directing people to different exits. Apparently, there was some kind of issue with the main entrance, so they were routing everyone through the side exits to spread out the crowd. I ended up in a group of people being directed to the east exit, which led to this small courtyard area between our building and the office complex next door. It wasn't a space I'd ever really noticed before, just a little concrete area with a few benches and some landscaping that the building management probably thought made the place look more upscale. There were maybe 30 of us clustered in this courtyard, a mix of people from different floors and companies in the building. Most people were checking their phones or complaining about the timing of the drill. I was doing the same, trying to remember what I'd been working on when the alarm interrupted. That's when I noticed this woman standing near one of the benches, looking around like she was trying to figure out where she was supposed to be. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and was wearing a blue dress that stood out among all the business, casual khakis and button-downs. She caught me looking and walked over. "Do you work in this building?" she asked, "because I have no idea if I'm in the right evacuation area." "I do, but honestly, I've never been to this part of the building before," I admitted. "I think as long as we're outside and away from the building, we're probably fine." "I'm Julia," she said, extending her hand. "I work for the marketing firm on the 7th floor." "I'm Marcus, accounting on the 5th floor," I replied. So we've been working in the same building for who knows how long and never met. That's the thing about office buildings, she said. You can work 5 floors away from someone and never cross paths unless there's an emergency. We started talking while we waited for the all-clear signal. I found out Julia had been working in the building for about 8 months, which meant she'd started right around the time I'd gotten promoted and moved to a different department. She was handling social media marketing for small businesses, and I was processing invoices for a manufacturing company. So you're the person who makes sure people get paid, she said, and I'm the person who helps people spend money they probably don't have on advertising. We're like opposite sides of the economic cycle, I agreed. You create demand, I process the financial consequences. 20 minutes turned into 30, then 45. Someone mentioned that the fire department was taking their time because they couldn't locate the source of the alarm. It was starting to look like we might be out there for a while. Julia and I had moved from work talk to more personal conversation. She told me about moving to the city from a small town in Oregon and how she was still adjusting to urban life. I talked about growing up here and how I'd never lived anywhere else, which made me feel boring in comparison. It's not boring, she assured me. It means you know all the good places. I'm still figuring out where to get decent coffee and whether there are any parks worth visiting. I started giving her recommendations for coffee shops and restaurants, and she was writing them down in her phone like she was taking notes for a test. It was endearing how seriously she approached the task of exploring her new city. An hour into our evacuation, people were getting restless. Someone had brought out folding chairs from a supply closet, and we were all settling in like this was an outdoor office party nobody had planned. Julia and I ended up sharing one of the benches, continuing our conversation about everything from favourite movies to weird food combinations we'd tried. This is the longest fire drill I've ever experienced, she said, but also probably the most productive in terms of meeting new people. Are you saying you're glad there was a false alarm? I asked. I'm saying if there had to be a false alarm, I'm glad I got stuck in the evacuation area with someone interesting to talk to. When they finally gave us the all clear and we were heading back into the building, Julia stopped me at the elevator bank. This might be forward, she said, but would you want to grab dinner sometime? You can show me one of those restaurants you recommended. I said yes immediately, probably faster than was dignified, but I'd been hoping she'd ask or working up the courage to ask her myself. Our first date was at the Italian place I'd suggested, and we picked up our conversation right where we'd left off in the courtyard. No awkward first date silences or running out of things to talk about. It felt like we'd been friends for years instead of having met during an emergency evacuation. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and it became this running joke that we'd needed a fake fire alarm to actually meet despite working in the same building. Julia would text me whenever she heard the fire alarm in her apartment building, asking if I thought it was the universe trying to introduce her to her neighbours. 8 months later, we moved in together, and Julia finally got to leave that building for a better job at a bigger marketing firm. I stayed in accounting, but now I had someone to meet for lunch who actually knew where all the good restaurants were. We got engaged last year, and Julia insisted we take our engagement photos in the courtyard where we spent that first afternoon getting to know each other. The building management thought it was sweet and let us use the space after hours for the photo shoot. The wedding is planned for next spring, and we're incorporating the fire drill story into our ceremony somehow. Our save the dates had a little fire alarm icon, and we're thinking about giving out mini fire extinguishers as wedding favours because we're nothing if not committed to our theme. People always laugh when we tell them we met during a fire drill, but it's actually the perfect metaphor for our relationship. Sometimes, the best things happen when your normal routine gets completely interrupted and you have to adapt to unexpected circumstances. That story comes to an end. There's something so perfectly mundane and romantic about meeting someone during a fire drill. Most people spend evacuation time complaining or checking their phones, but these two turned it into a speed dating session. The fact that they worked in the same building for months without meeting shows how easy it is to miss connections when everyone's stuck in their daily routine. Sometimes it takes a false alarm to shake things up just enough for the right people to find each other. Let's move on to our next story, which involves what might be the most expensive coffee spill in relationship history. I spilled coffee on his laptop and somehow turned a potential lawsuit into a love story. OP shared this tale of the most expensive coffee accident that somehow worked out perfectly. I was having one of those mornings where everything that could go wrong was going wrong. I'd overslept, couldn't find my keys, and was running 20 minutes late for a work presentation that I absolutely couldn't miss. I'd grabbed the largest coffee the shop had to offer and was speed walking down the street, checking my phone for messages from my boss when disaster struck. There was this guy sitting at one of those outdoor tables, laptop open, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. He had papers spread out everywhere and looked like he was in his own little productive bubble. I was so focused on my phone that I didn't see him until it was too late. My elbow caught his table as I rushed past, and my enormous coffee went flying in a perfect arc that seemed to happen in slow motion. The entire contents of my 20-ounce latte landed directly on his MacBook Pro, which immediately started making the kind of electronic death sounds that mean you've just destroyed something expensive. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," I kept repeating, grabbing napkins from every table around us and trying to soak up the coffee that was now pooling under his laptop. "I am so sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going." The guy, who I now noticed was actually pretty cute despite looking absolutely stunned, was just staring at his coffee-soaked computer. Steam was literally rising from the keyboard, which definitely wasn't a good sign. "Is it still on?" I asked, which was probably the stupidest question possible, since the screen had gone completely black. "It was," he said, and I couldn't tell if he was about to start laughing or yelling. I was working on a presentation that's due in 3 hours. My heart sank. Not only had I destroyed someone's computer, but I'd also potentially ruined their entire day. "Please let me pay for repairs or a new laptop, or whatever you need. I have insurance for this kind of thing." "Do you carry laptop destruction insurance?" he asked, and I realized he was definitely leaning toward laughing rather than yelling. "Because that would be impressively specific coverage." "I was going to figure something out," I said, still frantically dabbing at coffee with napkins. "I could call my insurance company and see if clumsiness falls under liability or something." He started laughing then, which was not the reaction I'd been expecting. "I'm Oliver," he said, extending his hand like we were meeting at a networking event instead of at the scene of my coffee crime. "And honestly, this laptop has been acting up for weeks. You might have just given me the excuse I needed to finally replace it." "I'm Claire," I replied, shaking his coffee sticky hand. "And I promise I'm not usually a walking disaster. This is definitely a new low, even for me." "What were you rushing to?" he asked, starting to pack up his soggy papers. "Work presentation," I said, checking my phone again, which I'm now definitely going to be late for because I need to figure out how to replace your computer before I can focus on anything else. "What if I told you the presentation I was working on isn't actually due for 3 days, and I was just getting ahead on my work?" Oliver said. "Would that make you feel less terrible about the laptop situation?" "A little," I admitted, "but I still destroyed your computer with my coffee." "True," he said, "but now I have a much more interesting story to tell about why I need a new laptop." Most people just say theirs got old or slow. I get to say mine was casualties in a coffee collision. We ended up walking to the nearest electronics store together, where I insisted on buying him a replacement laptop that was significantly nicer than his old one. Oliver kept protesting that it wasn't necessary, but I was not going to be responsible for someone losing their work because of my caffeine-fueled clumsiness. While we waited for the store employee to transfer his data from the damaged laptop, which miraculously had survived with most of its contents intact, we kept talking. I found out Oliver worked as a freelance graphic designer and had been at the coffee shop working on a logo design for a local restaurant. He found out I worked in event planning and was constantly running between meetings with clients who changed their minds about everything. So you're professionally organised but personally chaotic?" he asked. That's probably the most accurate description of my life anyone's ever given, I said. When the laptop was ready, Oliver insisted on buying me coffee to replace the one I'd sacrificed to his computer. We went to a different coffee shop, where I was extra careful about keeping my drink away from any electronic devices. "This feels backward," I said. "I should be buying you coffee for the next 6 months to make up for destroying your laptop." "What if instead of 6 months of coffee, you let me take you to dinner?" he asked. "I figure one good meal is probably equivalent to like 20 cups of coffee, mathematically speaking." I said yes, mostly because his math was completely wrong, but also because I'd been enjoying our conversation way too much to want it to end. Plus, I figured I owed him at least one meal after the laptop incident. Our first date was at a restaurant with no laptops in sight, which Oliver joked was probably the safest option, given my track record with electronic devices. We talked for 3 hours about everything from our worst work disasters to our favourite travel destinations. He told me about freelancing and how he'd gotten into design. I told him about event planning and some of the more ridiculous client requests I'd dealt with. "What's the weirdest event you've ever planned?" he asked. "A wedding where the couple wanted everything to be purple, including the food," I said. "Purple mashed potatoes are not as appetizing as you might think." "I designed a logo once for a company that sold decorative toilet paper," he countered. "They wanted it to look elegant and luxurious while still clearly being about bathroom products." We started seeing each other regularly after that, and Oliver would joke that our relationship had literally cost me the price of a MacBook Pro. He'd send me photos of his laptop with captions like "still coffee free" or "no beverages were harmed in the making of this design." 6 months later, we moved in together, and Oliver made me promise to keep all beverages at least 3 feet away from his work setup. Our apartment has a strict no drinks near electronics policy that we both take very seriously. We got engaged 2 years later, and Oliver proposed at the same coffee shop where I'd destroyed his laptop. He'd arranged with the staff to recreate the scene, complete with a fake laptop and a cup of coffee that was actually empty. When I accidentally knocked over the coffee again, there was a ring box underneath instead of computer parts. Our wedding invitations had a little illustration of a laptop with coffee spilling on it, and our wedding favours were small bags of coffee beans with labels that said, "Handle with care." Oliver designed everything himself, using the laptop I'd bought him to replace the one I'd destroyed. People always ask us how we met, and when we tell them about the coffee spill, they can't believe that destroying someone's computer led to a marriage proposal. But it's true, and we have the receipts from the electronics store to prove it. That story is over. Honestly, turning a coffee disaster into a love story takes some serious optimism from both people involved. Most laptop drownings end with angry words and insurance claims, not wedding invitations. The fact that he was more amused than furious about his soggy MacBook probably says everything about what kind of person he is. Sometimes, the best relationships start with someone owing someone else a very expensive apology. Speaking of unexpected places to find connection, this next story proves that hospital waiting rooms can be surprisingly romantic when you're stuck there long enough. OP wrote about meeting their partner during one of those endless hospital waits that somehow turned into the beginning of something beautiful. "I was spending my Saturday in the emergency room, which definitely wasn't how I'd planned to spend my weekend. My brother had decided to try skateboarding for the first time in 15 years and had predictably broken his wrist within 10 minutes of getting on the board. He'd called me from the skate park, sheepishly admitting that maybe he wasn't as young as he used to be. The ER was packed, which seemed to be the standard situation every time I'd ever had to go there. My brother was somewhere behind those double doors getting x-rays and probably getting lectured about age-appropriate hobbies, while I was stuck in the waiting room with about 30 other people who all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I'd found a seat near the window and was trying to read a book on my phone when I noticed the woman sitting across from me. She had blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun and was wearing paint-splattered jeans, like she'd been interrupted in the middle of some art project. She looked worried and kept checking her phone every few minutes. After about an hour of sitting there, she caught me looking and gave me a tired smile. "Long day?" she asked. "My brother decided to relive his teenage skateboarding days," I said. "Turns out 35-year-old bones don't bounce back the same way. What about you?" "My best friend thought she could move a bookshelf by herself," she replied. Spoiler alert, the bookshelf won. She's getting stitches in her forehead right now. "Why do people think they can move heavy furniture alone?" I asked. "It's like there's some universal human delusion about our own strength when it comes to household items. Right?" She texted me a photo of this massive wooden bookshelf and said she was just going to scoot it across the room, she said, shaking her head. 20 minutes later, I'm getting a call from the urgent care asking me to drive her to the ER because apparently scooting turned into toppling. We started talking to pass the time, and I found out her name was Chloe, and she was a freelance illustrator, which explained the paint on her jeans. She'd been working on a children's book illustration when her friend had called with the bookshelf emergency. I told her I worked in IT support and had been looking forward to a quiet Saturday of doing absolutely nothing productive. "So we both had our relaxing weekends hijacked by other people's poor decision-making," she observed. "Seems like it," I agreed. Although I have to admit this is the most interesting conversation I've had in a hospital waiting room. "That's probably not saying much," Chloe said. "Hospital waiting room conversation is usually pretty grim." We kept talking while nurses called other people back and new patients checked in. Chloe told me about the children's book she was illustrating, which was about a cat who thought he was a dog. I told her about the tech support calls I'd been dealing with lately, including one person who'd been convinced their computer was broken because they'd been trying to use a calculator app to browse the internet. "People really called you about that?" she asked, laughing. "Last Tuesday," I confirmed. Took me 20 minutes to figure out what was happening because they kept saying the internet looked different and only showed numbers. 2 hours in, we'd moved from small talk to actual conversation. Chloe told me about growing up in Vermont and moving to the city for art school. I told her about working my way up from help desk to systems administration and how I was thinking about going back to school for a computer science degree. "What's stopping you?" she asked. "Time, mostly," I said, "and probably fear of being the old guy in all the classes." "How old are you?" she asked. 28. "That's not old," she said. "I went back to school for my illustration degree at 26, and I wasn't even close to being the oldest person in my classes." 3 hours in, we'd covered everything from favourite movies to worst jobs to whether cereal counts as soup. Chloe had a way of asking questions that made me think about things I'd never really considered before, and she had stories about her illustration work that were way more interesting than anything I dealt with in IT. "Do you ever get tired of drawing the same style all the time?" I asked. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I'll get a project like this cat dog book, and it's so weird and fun that I remember why I love doing this." "I think I need more weird and fun in my job," I said. "Most of my day is explaining to people that they need to turn things off and on again." "The classic IT solution," she said. "Have you tried turning your career off and on again?" 4 hours after we'd both arrived, they finally called my brother's name, and a few minutes later, Chloe's friend appeared with a bandaged forehead and a sheepish expression. We were both getting ready to leave when Chloe turned to me. "This is going to sound weird," she said, "but this has been the best part of my day, even though we're both here because of other people's accidents." "I was thinking the same thing," I said, which probably says something about how exciting my social life usually is. "Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime?" she asked. "Somewhere that doesn't require anyone to be injured first." I said yes immediately, and we exchanged numbers right there in the hospital lobby, while her friend and my brother compared their respective injury stories. Our first date was at a coffee shop near her apartment, and we picked up our conversation exactly where we'd left off in the waiting room. No awkward first date silences or struggling to find things to talk about. It felt like we'd been friends for years instead of having met in a hospital. Chloe brought a sketchbook and drew little doodles while we talked, including a cartoon of my brother falling off his skateboard and her friend being chased by an angry bookshelf. Her drawings were actually really good, and I found myself watching her hands while she worked. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and Chloe would joke that we'd met in the most romantic location possible. A place filled with sick people and uncomfortable chairs. But honestly, it had been romantic in its own way. We'd had hours to just talk and get to know each other without any distractions or pressure. 8 months later, we moved in together, and Chloe set up her art studio in what was supposed to be our dining room. I didn't mind because watching her work was better entertainment than anything on TV. We got engaged last year, and Chloe designed our wedding invitations herself, complete with little illustrations of a skateboard and a bookshelf to commemorate the accidents that brought us together. Her friend and my brother both took credit for our relationship, claiming they'd sacrificed their bodies for our happiness. The wedding is planned for this fall, and we're thinking about incorporating a first aid theme into the decorations, because at this point, we're committed to the story of how we met. Our relationship started with other people's poor decisions, but it turned into the best decision either of us ever made. That story wraps up. There's something beautiful about finding love in a place designed for healing. Most people try to avoid spending hours in hospital waiting rooms, but these two turned it into an extended first date with fluorescent lighting and terrible magazines. The fact that they were both there taking care of friends who'd made questionable life choices probably showed their character from the start. Sometimes, the best connections happen when you're both stuck in the same uncomfortable situation with nothing to do but actually talk to each other. Our next story involves what might be the most confusing rideshare mix-up in history, and somehow it led to more than just an awkward car ride. I accidentally got into the wrong Uber and ended up with a husband instead of just a ride home. OP shared this story about a transportation mistake that turned into the best detour of their life. It was one of those nights where everything had gone slightly wrong, but not catastrophically wrong. I'd been out with friends at a bar downtown, and we'd all decided to call it a night around 11. Everyone else had carpooled together, but I'd driven myself and then realised I'd had too much wine to drive home safely. I called an Uber and waited outside the bar, checking my phone for the driver's location. The app said my driver, Malik, would be there in a blue Honda Civic, license plate, starting with 7G. When a blue Honda pulled up and the driver rolled down the window, I climbed into the back seat without really looking at him. "Hey," I said, settling in with my purse and the leftover breadsticks I'd convinced the server to let me take home. "Thanks for picking me up. I'm going to the Riverside apartment complex on Oak Street." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror with a confused expression. "I think you might have the wrong car," he said. "I'm actually waiting for someone named Marcus." I pulled out my phone and checked my Uber app, then looked at the license plate visible through the windshield. Sure enough, this was not my ride. The license plate was completely different, and according to my app, my actual driver was still 3 minutes away. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I said, starting to gather my things. "I just saw a blue Honda and assumed it was mine. I'm clearly having a smarter evening than I thought." "No worries," the driver said, laughing. "Happens all the time. I'm Liam, by the way, and you're definitely not Marcus, unless Marcus has changed significantly since he requested the ride." "I'm Sophie, and I promise I don't usually climb into random people's cars," I said. "Although, I guess technically, this isn't random since you're an Uber driver, just not my Uber driver." "True," Liam said. "You picked the right type of car to accidentally get into. Could have been worse." I was about to get out when my phone buzzed with a notification that my actual driver had cancelled due to a vehicle problem. Great. I was back to square one, sitting in the wrong Uber with breadsticks and probably a 15-minute wait for the next available driver. "My ride just cancelled," I told Liam, "so I guess I need to get out and start over with the whole process." "Where are you trying to go?" he asked. "Riverside Apartments on Oak Street," I said. "That's like 10 minutes from where I'm supposed to pick up Marcus," Liam said. "If you want, I can call Marcus and see if he minds sharing the ride." Might be easier than waiting for another driver. It seemed like a reasonable solution, and I was tired and ready to get home. Liam called his passenger and explained the situation. Apparently, Marcus was a college student who was also trying to get home from downtown and was perfectly fine with sharing the ride as long as I didn't mind the detour to pick him up. Marcus says he's cool with it if you are, Liam told me, and he's offering to split the fare since you're basically carpooling at this point. That's really nice of him, I said, and honestly, I'm just grateful not to have to wait for another driver. We drove to pick up Marcus, who turned out to be a friendly kid who spent the entire ride telling us about his economics final and how he was pretty sure he'd just failed it spectacularly. Liam was asking him questions about his major and giving him encouragement about the test, and I found myself thinking that this was the nicest Uber driver I'd ever encountered. When we dropped Marcus off at his dorm, Liam refused to let me pay for my portion of the ride. You didn't actually book this trip, he pointed out, and Marcus already covered his part. Consider it a freebie for being a good sport about the mix-up. Are you sure? I asked. I feel like I should pay for something since you went out of your way to help me out. Tell you what, Liam said as we pulled up to my apartment complex. If you really want to make it up to me, you could let me buy you coffee sometime when I'm not working. I looked at him more carefully for the first time since getting in his car. He had dark hair and brown eyes, and when he smiled, he had these dimples that were honestly unfair. Plus, he'd been nothing but kind and funny during this entire ridiculous situation. Are you asking me out? I asked. I'm asking if you want to get coffee with the Uber driver whose car you accidentally commandeered, he said. Whether that counts as being asked out is up to interpretation. I gave him my number before getting out of the car, and he texted me before I even made it upstairs to make sure I'd gotten home safely. We made plans for coffee that weekend, and I spent the next 3 days telling everyone about how I'd accidentally gotten into the wrong Uber and somehow ended up with a date. Our first official meeting was at a coffee shop near campus, and Liam told me he was actually a graduate student in psychology who drove for Uber part-time to help pay for school. I told him I worked as a graphic designer and had a terrible track record with both navigation and ride-sharing apps. So this kind of mix-up probably happens to you a lot, he said. More often than I'd like to admit, I confessed. I once spent 20 minutes waiting for a pizza delivery guy who turned out to be delivering to the apartment next door. That's actually impressive, Liam said. Most people don't have such consistent transportation confusion. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and Liam would joke that I was his favourite accidental passenger. He eventually stopped driving for Uber once he finished his degree, but we kept the story about how we met as our go-to conversation starter at parties. 2 years later, when Liam proposed, he did it in the back seat of a blue Honda Civic that he'd borrowed from his friend specifically for the occasion. He said he wanted to recreate the scene of our first meeting, even though, technically, our first meeting had been me climbing into his car by mistake. We got married last summer, and our wedding favours were little toy cars with tags that said, "Thanks for sharing the ride." Liam's best man mentioned in his speech that we were the only couple he knew who met because of a ride-sharing error, and that maybe there should be an app specifically for people who get into the wrong cars. Looking back, I'm grateful for whatever combination of wine and poor decision-making led me to climb into Liam's car that night. It was definitely not the ride I ordered, but it ended up being exactly the ride I needed. That story comes to an end. Honestly, this is probably the only time in history that getting into the wrong car worked out perfectly for everyone involved. Usually, these mix-ups end with awkward apologies and having to wait for another ride, not wedding plans. The fact that Liam was thoughtful enough to call his actual passenger and work out a ride-share solution shows he was a keeper from minute one. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never intended to reach. Let's move on to our next story, which proves that yard sales can be competitive sports when the right item is involved. OP shared this tale about a yard sale showdown that turned into something much more romantic than a bidding war over household items. I was on a mission that Saturday morning, armed with a list of yard sales from Craigslist and a determination to find some decent furniture for my new apartment. I'd just moved to town for a new job and was living with the bare minimum of possessions, which meant I needed basically everything from coffee tables to lamps to anything that would make my place look less like a college dorm room. The third sale on my list was in this nice suburban neighbourhood, and from the street I could see they had some promising-looking items spread across their driveway and front lawn. There were bookshelves, kitchen appliances, and what looked like some decent furniture pieces that hadn't been completely destroyed by years of use. I was browsing through a box of kitchen utensils when I spotted it in my peripheral vision. Sitting on a card table near the garage was this amazing vintage lamp with a brass base and a green glass shade. It was exactly the kind of piece I'd been hoping to find, something with character that would actually make my living room look like an adult lived there. I made my way over to examine it more closely, and it was even better up close. The brass had that perfect patina that you can't fake, and the glass shade had these intricate patterns that caught the morning light beautifully. Someone had put a tiny price sticker on it that said $5, which seemed almost too good to be true. I was reaching for the lamp when another hand appeared from the opposite direction, also going for the same piece. We both stopped, hands hovering over the lamp, like we were in some kind of antique standoff. "I think I was here first," said the woman attached to the other hand. She was probably around my age, with curly brown hair and wearing a vintage band t-shirt that suggested she had good taste in both music and yard sale finds. "I'm pretty sure I saw it first," I replied, though honestly I wasn't entirely sure of the timeline. I was making my way over here specifically for this lamp. We both kept our hands near the lamp, neither of us willing to back down from what was clearly the best item at this entire yard sale. Other shoppers were starting to notice our standoff, and I could see the elderly woman running the sale watching us with amusement. "This is ridiculous," the woman said, but she was smiling when she said it. "We're seriously having a territorial dispute over a $5 lamp." "A very nice $5 lamp," I corrected. "This is clearly the highlight of the entire sale. Worth fighting for." "You have good taste, Laisha," she admitted. "I've been to 4 yard sales this morning, and this is the first thing I've seen that's actually worth buying." "Same here," I said. "I'm new to town and trying to furnish an apartment that currently looks like a monk's cell." The woman running the sale came over to see what was happening. "Are you two both interested in the lamp?" she asked. "Very interested," we both said at the same time. "We are," the woman with curly hair added, "and apparently we're both too stubborn to let the other person have it." The elderly woman smiled. "Well, I hate to break up a good negotiation, but that lamp belonged to my late husband's mother. It's been in our family for probably 60 years. I'd love to see it go to someone who really appreciates it." "I absolutely appreciate it," I said quickly. "It would be perfect for my living room." "I appreciate it too," the other woman added. "I've been looking for exactly this style for months." The seller looked between us, clearly enjoying the drama we'd created over her lamp. "Tell you what," she said, "why don't you two figure out some way to decide who gets it? Rock, paper, scissors? Arm wrestling? Whatever works." "What about this?" the curly-haired woman suggested. "We both write down on paper what this lamp means to us, and she decides who gets it based on that." "That's actually a good idea," I said, though I was mentally scrambling to think of what I could write that would be more compelling than whatever she might come up with. The seller brought us pieces of paper and pens, and we both moved to opposite sides of the driveway to write our lamp essays in secret. I wrote about moving to a new city where I didn't know anyone, and how this lamp would be the first piece that made my apartment feel like home instead of just a place where I slept. When we came back together, the seller read both essays out loud. Mine was about new beginnings and making a space feel like home. Hers was about how she'd grown up in a house full of vintage furniture, and this lamp reminded her of spending afternoons at her grandmother's house, reading books under a similar lamp. "Well," the seller said after reading both essays, "you both clearly love this lamp for good reasons. But I think I have a better solution." She disappeared into the garage and came back, carrying an identical lamp. Same brass base, same green glass shade, just as beautiful as the first one. "These were a pair," she explained. "I was only planning to sell one because I thought no one would want both, but it seems like today I have two people who really appreciate them. We both stared at the matching lamps, then at each other, then started laughing at how ridiculous the whole situation had been. "I'm Hannah," the curly-haired woman said, extending her hand, "and I'm sorry for almost fighting you over a lamp." "I'm David," I replied, shaking her hand, "and I'm sorry for being just as stubborn about it." We each bought our lamps, and Hannah helped me load mine into my car while I helped her with hers. As we were finishing up, she mentioned that she was also relatively new to town and hadn't found her favourite coffee shop yet. "I know a good place," I offered. "If you want, I could show you where it is." "Consider it a peace treaty after our lamp standoff." "I'd like that," she said. "Plus, I want to see how your lamp looks in your apartment." For comparison purposes, we ended up going for coffee that afternoon, and Hannah told me she'd moved here for a job at the local museum, working in their exhibitions department. I told her about my job in marketing and how I was still figuring out the best neighbourhoods and restaurants. "So we're both new in town and both have excellent taste in vintage lamps," she observed. "Seems like it," I agreed. "We should probably stick together for future yard sale adventures." That became our Saturday routine, hitting yard sales and flea markets together, with Hannah's expert eye for vintage pieces and my willingness to haggle over prices. We made a good team, and our apartment slowly filled up with interesting finds that we'd discovered together. 6 months later, we were officially dating, and our matching lamps had become conversation pieces in both of our places. Friends would visit and immediately notice we had identical lamps, and we'd tell the story of our yard sale standoff. A year after that, we moved in together, and our matching lamps found new homes in our shared living room, positioned on either side of the couch like bookends. Hannah said they looked like they'd always been meant to be together, which was probably true for both the lamps and us. We got engaged 2 years later, and Hannah insisted we get married at an outdoor venue that would remind people of a really upscale yard sale. Our wedding favours were little vintage-style price tags with our names and wedding date, and we displayed some of our best yard sale finds as decorations. The elderly woman who sold us the lamps came to our wedding as a special guest, and she told everyone how she'd known from the moment she saw us fighting over her lamp that we were perfect for each other. She said the lamps had been waiting 60 years to bring the right people together. People always ask us how we met, and when we tell them about battling over a $5 lamp, they think we're joking, but it's true, and we still have both lamps as proof of our very first negotiation as a couple. That story's over. The image of two people having a polite standoff over a vintage lamp is honestly adorable. Most yard sale disputes end with someone walking away disappointed, but these two got matching lamps and a love story. The fact that there were two identical lamps the whole time feels like the universe was just waiting for the right moment to reveal the perfect solution. Sometimes the best relationships start with a little healthy competition over home decor. Moving on to our next story, which involves the kind of roadside assistance that goes way beyond just changing a tyre. OP shared this story about a flat tyre that led to much more than just getting back on the road. I was driving home from visiting my sister about 2 hours outside the city when I heard that unmistakable sound of rubber meeting pavement in all the wrong ways. The rhythmic thumping that means your day is about to get significantly more complicated and expensive. I pulled over to the shoulder of this rural highway and confirmed what I already knew. My rear tyre was completely flat. I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring at the tyre and trying to remember the last time I'd actually changed one myself. The answer was never. I'd always lived in places where AAA could reach me or had friends with trucks who could help out. But here I was on a country road with barely any cell service and no idea what I was doing. I popped the trunk and found my spare tyre, which looked appropriately spare and not particularly confidence-inspiring. I also found a jack that came with approximately 0 instructions and looked like it had been designed by someone who assumed everyone automatically knew how to use it. I was standing there holding the jack and probably looking completely lost when a pickup truck pulled over behind me. The driver got out, and I immediately felt better about my situation. He was maybe 30, wearing work clothes and boots, with the kind of practical competence that suggested he actually knew how to fix things. "Looks like you could use some help," he said, walking over with a smile. "I'm Jack, and I promise I know more about changing tyres than that manual in your glove compartment." "I'm Emma," I said, and I was just about to call AAA and wait 2 hours for them to do something that probably takes 10 minutes when you know what you're doing. "It really does only take about 10 minutes, Jack said, already examining my flat tyre. "Looks like you picked up a nail or something sharp. The tyre's definitely done, but your spare should get you home fine." He had my car jacked up and the flat tyre off before I'd even figured out how to unfold the instructions that came with the jack. I stood there trying to be helpful by holding things and asking questions about what he was doing. "You don't have to help me out," I said, as he was mounting the spare tyre. "I could have figured it out eventually, probably." "I'm sure you could have," Jack said, "but I was heading in this direction anyway, and it's nice to have an excuse to use actual skills instead of just sitting in traffic." "What kind of work do you do?" I asked. "I'm a contractor," he said, tightening the last bolt on my spare tyre. "Mostly residential stuff, kitchen renovations, bathroom remodels, that kind of thing. So I spend a lot of time fixing things that other people have given up on." "That sounds satisfying," I said. "I work in accounting, so I mostly fix other people's math problems, which is significantly less hands-on." Jack lowered the jack and packed up the tools, making the whole process look effortless. "There you go," he said. "That spare should be fine for getting you home, but you'll want to get a real tyre as soon as you can. The spare isn't meant for long-distance driving." I started reaching for my purse to offer him money for helping me out, but he waved me off before I could even get my wallet out. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Just pay it forward next time you see someone who needs help." "At least let me buy you coffee or something," I said. "You just saved me hours of waiting around on the side of the road." Jack considered this for a moment. "You know what?" he said. "There's a diner about 5 miles up the road that makes excellent pie. If you want to follow me there, I could go for coffee, and you could tell me about these math problems you fix." I followed his pickup to a small-town diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1970s, and probably served the kind of food that was bad for you in all the best ways. We got a booth by the window, and Jack ordered coffee and apple pie, while I got coffee and tried to process how my tyre disaster had turned into an impromptu first date. "So, what kind of accounting do you do?" he asked after the waitress brought our order. "Small business accounting mostly," I said. "A lot of restaurants and retail shops that need someone to make sense of their books and deal with tax stuff." "That's actually really useful," Jack said. "I'm terrible at the business side of contracting. I can build you a perfect kitchen, but ask me to organise receipts or plan a budget, and I'm completely lost." We talked for over an hour about work and life and growing up in small towns versus living in cities. Jack had grown up in this area and taken over his father's contracting business after college. I'd grown up in a similar small town, but moved to the city for school and work. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Small town life?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "I miss knowing everyone and having actual seasons and being able to see stars at night. But I also like having more than one coffee shop and not having everyone know my business." "Fair points," Jack said, "though I have to say, the coffee shop situation out here has improved significantly in recent years." When we finished our coffee and pie, Jack walked me out to my car and double-checked that the spare tyre still looked secure. "Drive carefully," he said, "and seriously, get that tyre replaced as soon as you can." "I will," I promised. "And thank you again for stopping. You completely saved my day." "It was my pleasure," Jack said, "and I hope you'll let me know how the tyre replacement goes." I gave him my number, and he texted me before I even made it back to the city to make sure I'd gotten home safely. We started texting regularly after that, and Jack would send me photos of his renovation projects while I'd complain about particularly difficult clients. 2 weeks later, Jack drove to the city to take me to dinner at a restaurant that didn't serve pie but had excellent pasta. We started seeing each other regularly after that, with me driving out to visit him on weekends and him coming to the city when his work schedule allowed. 6 months later, I was spending so much time at Jack's place that I was basically living there on weekends. He'd converted part of his garage into an office space for me so I could work remotely when I visited. A year after the tyre incident, Jack proposed to me in that same diner where we'd had our first coffee together. He'd arranged with the staff to bring out a piece of apple pie with the ring hidden underneath, and he said he wanted to propose in the place where he'd first realised he was falling for me. We got married last fall, and I moved out of the city to live with Jack full-time. I kept most of my clients and worked remotely, while Jack expanded his business to include some commercial projects in the city. Our wedding reception was at the same diner, and Jack's best man told everyone about how we met when he stopped to help me change a tyre. The story got a lot of laughs, and several people mentioned that they'd never heard of roadside assistance leading to marriage before. People always say I got lucky that Jack stopped to help me, but honestly, I think we both got lucky that my tyre decided to go flat at exactly the right moment on exactly the right road. That story reaches its conclusion. There's something so genuinely romantic about someone stopping to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. Jack could have just changed her tyre and driven away, but instead he turned a roadside emergency into coffee and pie. I love how he turned potential road rage into a marriage proposal location. Most people would have just chalked it up to city life and moved on, but Jack saw someone who needed help and made it into something beautiful. The fact that roadside assistance became a lifelong partnership is the kind of story that makes you believe in random acts of kindness leading to something bigger. Let's move to another story about how getting locked out of your own place can sometimes open unexpected doors. OP posted about meeting their partner through what they call the most embarrassing housing situation of their adult life. I was having one of those days where everything that could go wrong was determined to go wrong in the most inconvenient way possible. I'd been out running errands all afternoon, hitting the bank, the grocery store, the pharmacy, basically taking care of all those weekend tasks that I'd been putting off during the week, because I'm apparently incapable of being a functional adult during normal business hours. I got back to my apartment building around 6 in the evening, arms full of shopping bags and that particular kind of tired that comes from spending hours in crowded stores with fluorescent lighting. I fumbled around in my purse for my keys while trying to balance everything I'd bought, which included a gallon of milk that was getting heavier by the second. I found my keys, or what I thought were my keys, and tried to unlock the main door to my building. The key wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired and not inserting it properly, but it still wouldn't budge. That's when I looked more closely at the keychain and realised these weren't my keys at all. Somehow, during my afternoon of errands, I'd picked up someone else's keys and left mine somewhere in the city. I had no idea where or when it had happened, just that I was now standing outside my own building with a stranger's keys and no way to get inside. I tried calling my landlord, but it went straight to voicemail because of course it did. It was Saturday evening, and he was probably at home having a normal weekend instead of dealing with tenants who lost their keys like irresponsible children. I was standing there trying to figure out my next move when the door opened and this woman came out carrying a laundry basket. She had brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and was wearing paint-splattered clothes like she'd been working on some kind of art project. "Are you okay?" she asked, noticing that I was clearly having some kind of crisis on the front steps. "I locked myself out," I said, holding up the wrong set of keys. Or actually, I lost my keys and somehow ended up with someone else's keys, and now I can't get into my own building. "That's rough," she said, setting down her laundry basket. "What floor do you live on?" "Third floor, apartment 3B, I said. "No kidding, I'm 3A, she said. "I'm Rachel." "I've probably seen you in the hallway, but we've never actually met." "I'm Mike," I replied. "And yes, I think I've seen you too, usually when I'm rushing out for work and not paying attention to anything." "Do you want to use my phone to call your landlord? Or a locksmith or whoever?" Rachel offered. "I was just heading down to do laundry, but that can wait if you need help." I gratefully accepted her offer and we went up to her apartment, which was the exact same layout as mine, but felt completely different. Where my place was basically furnished with whatever was cheapest and most functional, Rachel's apartment had personality. There were paintings on the walls, plants on the windowsills, and books everywhere that suggested she actually read for pleasure, instead of just scrolling through her phone like I did most evenings. "Nice place," I said, while she handed me her phone. "You've actually made it look like a home, instead of a temporary storage facility for furniture." "Thanks," she said, laughing. "I've been here for about 2 years, so I've had time to accumulate stuff. Plus, I'm an art teacher, so I'm legally required to have weird decorations and too many supplies." I called my landlord and left another voicemail, then tried calling a 24-hour locksmith whose number I found online. The locksmith said they could come out, but it would be at least 2 hours and would cost me $150 for an emergency weekend call. 2 hours and $150, I told Rachel after hanging up, for something that's completely my own fault. "Gee, that's brutal," she said. "Do you have somewhere else you can wait? Or do you want to hang out here until the locksmith comes?" I was going to make dinner anyway, and I always cook too much food. I accepted her invitation, partly because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and partly because she seemed genuinely nice, and I was curious about what someone who actually had their life together ate for dinner. Rachel made this amazing pasta dish with vegetables from her tiny herb garden that she kept on the fire escape. We ate at her kitchen table while she told me about teaching middle school art classes and dealing with 12-year-olds who thought they were too cool for creativity. "What do you do?" she asked. "I work in IT support," I said. "So basically, I spend my days explaining to people that they need to turn things off and on again and wondering how they survive this long without basic technology skills." "That sounds frustrating," she said. "It can be," I admitted, "but it's also kind of satisfying when you actually fix something that was driving someone crazy. Like being a detective, but for computers instead of crimes." We kept talking while we ate, and I found out Rachel had moved here from a smaller city where she'd taught at a private school. She'd wanted to try urban public education and see if she could make a difference in a place that needed more resources and creativity. "Do you like it here?" I asked. "Most days," she said. "The kids are great, even when they're being difficult. And I like having actual museums and galleries and places to see art that isn't just hanging in the teacher's lounge." 2 hours turned into 3, and we were still talking when the locksmith finally called to say he was downstairs. Rachel came down with me to make sure everything went smoothly, and within 10 minutes, I had new keys and access to my own apartment again. "Thank you so much for letting me hang out and feeding me dinner," I said as we stood in the hallway between our doors. "You totally saved my evening from being a complete disaster." "It was fun," Rachel said. "I don't get to talk to adults very often outside of work, so this was actually a nice change of pace." "Would you maybe want to do it again sometime?" I asked. "Like on purpose this time, without me being locked out?" "I'd like that," she said, "though hopefully next time you'll remember to bring the right keys." We started having dinner together regularly after that, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine, which slowly started looking more like an actual home as Rachel offered decorating advice and occasionally brought over plants that she claimed needed more space. 6 months later, we were officially dating, and Rachel would joke that I'd locked myself out on purpose just to meet her. Which wasn't true, but I also wasn't entirely unhappy that my absent-mindedness had led to finding out that my neighbour was someone I actually wanted to spend time with. A year after the lockout incident, when my lease was up for renewal, Rachel suggested we look into getting a 2-bedroom place together. We found an apartment in the same building, just 1 floor up, and Rachel helped me pack and unpack for the shortest move in history. We got engaged 2 years later, and Rachel made the engagement photos into a little comic strip, showing the progression from me standing outside with the wrong keys to us moving in together. She's still an art teacher, and she still cooks too much food, which works out perfectly since I still eat too much of whatever she makes. Our wedding invitations had a little illustration of apartment keys, and our wedding favours were custom keychains with our new address. Rachel designed everything herself because she's talented, and also because she said she couldn't trust me not to accidentally order the wrong invitations. People always ask us how we met, and when we tell them about the lockout incident, they say it sounds like something from a romantic comedy. But it's true, and I still have those wrong keys in a drawer somewhere as proof that sometimes losing something leads to finding something better. That story's over. The idea that being locked out of your own home could lead to discovering your perfect neighbour is almost too convenient to believe, but that's life sometimes. Rachel sounds like the kind of person who would help anyone in that situation, but Mike got lucky that she was also someone worth getting to know. Most people would have just called a locksmith and never thought about their neighbour again. Here's another story that proves sometimes the universe uses costume parties as its own personal matchmaking service. OP shared this story about a Halloween party mix-up that turned into something much more meaningful than just matching outfits. I'd been looking forward to this Halloween party for weeks. My friend Jessica was throwing it at her house, and she'd made it clear that everyone needed to come in costume or face social exile from our friend group. I'm not usually big on dressing up, but I'd found this perfect pirate costume at a thrift store that actually looked authentic instead of like a cheap Halloween store knockoff. I showed up to the party feeling pretty good about my costume choice. I had the full setup, the tricorn hat, the white shirt with puffy sleeves, a fake sword hanging from my belt, even a temporary tattoo of an anchor that I'd applied to my forearm. I thought I looked pretty convincing as a swashbuckling pirate from the golden age of sail. I walked into Jessica's living room, which had been decorated with fake spider webs and plastic skeletons, and immediately spotted someone across the room wearing the exact same costume as me. Same hat, same shirt, same sword, even the same temporary tattoo in the same location. It was like looking in a mirror, except the person in the mirror was a woman with long blonde hair who was currently talking to a group of people dressed as various movie characters. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if I should be embarrassed or amused by the situation. On one hand, showing up to a party wearing the same outfit as someone else is usually considered a fashion disaster. On the other hand, we both had excellent taste in pirate costumes, so maybe it was more of a compliment than a catastrophe. The woman in the matching pirate outfit noticed me staring and walked over with a huge grin on her face. "Well, this is either really awkward or really awesome," she said, gesturing between our identical costumes. "I'm Ethan, and apparently we shop at the same thrift stores." "I'm Sarah," I replied, laughing at how ridiculous we probably looked standing next to each other. "And I have to say, you wear that costume well. Very authentic pirate energy." "Thanks," Ethan said. "I spent way too much time researching historical pirate clothing to make sure I got the details right. I even watched documentaries about maritime fashion in the 18th century." "That's dedication," I said, impressed by her commitment to costume accuracy. "I just found this at a thrift store and thought it looked cool." "Well, you have good instincts," she said. "Most people just buy the plastic pirate costume from the party store and call it good. This actually looks like something a real pirate would wear." We started talking about our costumes and ended up comparing all the details we'd gotten right or wrong according to historical standards. Ethan had done her research and knew things like what kinds of fabrics pirates actually wore and how they would have tied their sashes. I had accidentally gotten most of the details right through sheer luck and good thrift store finds. "So what do we do about the matching costume situation?" I asked. "Do we pretend we don't see each other for the rest of the party, or do we lean into it and claim we planned this?" "I vote for leaning into it," Ethan said. "We could tell people we're part of the same pirate crew. Make up stories about our adventures on the high seas." "I like that idea," I said. "What should our pirate backstory be?" We spent the next hour creating an elaborate fictional history for our pirate characters. According to our story, we were Captain Sarah and First Mate Ethan of the ship Wandering Star, and we'd sailed together for years, plundering merchant vessels and searching for buried treasure. Ethan was the navigator who could read the stars, and I was the captain who could talk our way out of trouble with the British Navy. Other party guests started playing along with our pirate personas, asking us about our adventures and requesting pirate stories. Ethan and I took turns making up increasingly ridiculous tales about sword fights and sea monsters and treasure maps that led to islands full of gold. "Tell them about the time we fought the giant squid," Ethan would say, and I'd launch into some completely made-up story about battling sea creatures with nothing but our wits and our trusty swords. By the end of the party, we'd become the entertainment, with people gathering around to hear our next pirate adventure. We'd gotten so into character that we were even talking like pirates, with lots of ahoy matey and shiver me timbers thrown into our conversations. When the party started winding down, Ethan and I were cleaning up fake spider webs while still wearing our pirate costumes and still occasionally slipping into pirate accents. "This has been the most fun I've had at a party in years," Ethan said. "Usually, I just stand around making small talk and eating too much of whatever snacks people put out." "Same here," I said. "I was dreading the whole costume thing, but this turned out to be perfect." "What are the odds that two people would show up to the same party wearing identical pirate costumes?" Ethan asked. "Pretty low," I said, "but I'm glad it happened. We make a good pirate crew." "We do," she agreed, "and I'm thinking Captain Sarah and First Mate Ethan should continue their adventures beyond this party." "Are you asking me out while we're both dressed as pirates?" I asked. "I think I am," Ethan said. "Is that weird?" "It's definitely weird," I said, "but also kind of perfect." We exchanged numbers while still in full pirate's costume, and Ethan texted me the next day asking if I wanted to go see a pirate movie that was playing at the local theatre. Our first official date was watching old swashbuckling films and discussing which ones got the historical details right. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and pirate-themed dates became our thing. We went to maritime museums, visited historical ships, and even took a sailing lesson together where we learned that neither of us had any natural talent for actual seafaring. 6 months later, we were officially dating, and our friends still brought up the Halloween party where we'd shown up as matching pirates. Jessica claimed credit for our entire relationship, saying she'd known we'd be perfect for each other the moment she saw us standing together in identical costumes. We got engaged 2 years later, and Ethan proposed while we were both wearing our original pirate costumes from the party. She said she wanted to propose in character as First Mate Ethan, asking Captain Sarah to be her permanent crew member. Our wedding had a subtle nautical theme, and we included some pirate-inspired details in the decorations and music. Our wedding cake topper was a little pirate ship, and our first dance was to a song that sounded like it could have been played on an 18th century sailing vessel. People always laugh when we tell them we met because we showed up to a party wearing the same costume, but it's true. We still have both costumes, and we wear them every Halloween to whatever party we're attending. We've never encountered another couple with the same origin story, and we're pretty sure we never will. That story comes to an end. The commitment to creating an entire pirate backstory together shows they were both willing to dive headfirst into the absurdity of the situation. Most people would have been mortified about the matching costumes, but these two turned it into performance art, and then into a relationship. Sometimes the best connections happen when you're both willing to be completely ridiculous together. Moving on to another story about mistaken identity that worked out better than anyone could have planned. OP wrote about a case of confused identity that led to the most unexpected coffee date of their life. I was meeting someone for a blind date that my co-worker had set up. She'd given me a description of the guy and told me to meet him at this coffee shop downtown at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. According to her, he was tall with dark hair, would be wearing a blue button-down shirt, and his name was David. I got to the coffee shop a few minutes early and looked around for someone matching that description. There were several men sitting alone, but only one who fit the physical description and was wearing a blue shirt. He was sitting at a table near the window, reading a book and occasionally checking his phone like he was waiting for someone. I walked over to his table, trying not to look as nervous as I felt about the whole blind date situation. "David," I said, and he looked up from his book with a smile. "That's me," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "You must be the person I'm supposed to meet." I have to admit, I wasn't given much description to go on. "I'm Lisa," I said, sitting down across from him, "and I hope you don't mind that I'm a few minutes early." I'm always early to everything because I have this fear of being late. "Early is perfect," David said. "I got here about 20 minutes ago because I also have punctuality anxiety. Plus, I wanted to finish this chapter before we started talking." We ordered our coffee and started the usual first date conversation about jobs and hobbies and where we'd grown up. David told me he worked as a graphic designer for a marketing firm downtown and spent his free time reading science fiction novels and hiking on weekends. I told him I was a social worker and liked trying new restaurants and going to live music shows. "So how do you know Monica?" David asked, referring to my co-worker who had supposedly set us up. "Monica?" I said, confused. "I don't know anyone named Monica. I thought my co-worker Sarah set this up." David looked equally confused. "Sarah? I don't know anyone named Sarah. My friend Monica said she had a friend who might be interested in meeting me." We stared at each other for a moment as the realization dawned that neither of us was supposed to be there with the other person. "I think we might not be each other's blind dates," I said slowly. "I think you're right," David said, starting to laugh. "So we're both here to meet someone else, but we both fit the general description our friends gave us." "This is so embarrassing," I said, feeling my face turn red. "I just walked up to a complete stranger and introduced myself like I knew you." "Don't be embarrassed," David said. "This is actually kind of hilarious. We're both victims of the same case of mistaken identity." I looked around the coffee shop to see if there were any other people who looked like they might be waiting for blind dates. There was another man with dark hair at a table across the room, and a woman sitting alone near the counter who kept checking her phone. "I think your actual date might be over there," I said, pointing to the woman by the counter. "And mine might be the guy at the corner table." Probably," David agreed. "But here's a weird question. Do you want to finish our coffee first? I'm actually having a really good time talking to you, and it seems like a shame to cut this short just because we're not supposed to be here together." I considered this proposal. On one hand, we were both supposed to be meeting other people, and it felt wrong to just ignore that. On the other hand, I was enjoying our conversation more than I'd enjoyed any first date conversation in months, and the idea of starting over with someone else felt disappointing. "You know what?" I said. "Let's finish our coffee. But we should probably text our friends and let them know what happened so our actual dates don't think we stood them up." David texted Monica while I texted Sarah, explaining the mix-up and apologizing for the confusion. It turned out that David's actual blind date had also approached the wrong person and was currently having coffee with a guy named Steve, who wasn't supposed to be my date either. The whole situation was like a romantic comedy of errors. "Monica says my real date is having a great time with Steve," David reported, and apparently they're both laughing about how they ended up together by accident. "Sarah says the same thing," I said, reading her response, "so I guess everyone's happy with how this worked out." We ended up talking for another 2 hours, long after we'd finished our coffee. David told me about the science fiction novel he'd been reading when I approached him, and I told him about a music festival I was planning to attend the following weekend. We discovered we both loved hiking and had been to several of the same trails around the city. "This is probably the weirdest way I've ever met someone," David said, as we were getting ready to leave. "Definitely the weirdest," I agreed, "but also maybe the best. I mean, we both showed up here hoping to meet someone we'd connect with, and that's exactly what happened, just not with the people we expected." "Would you want to do this again sometime?" David asked. "Like on purpose this time, knowing who we actually are?" "I'd like that," I said, "though I have to warn you I'm much less interesting when I'm not accidentally crashing someone else's blind date." "I doubt that," David said, "but I guess I'll find out." We exchanged numbers and made plans for a proper first date the following weekend. David suggested we go hiking on one of the trails we'd both mentioned, and I suggested we get dinner afterward at a restaurant that wasn't a coffee shop where we might accidentally meet other people's dates. Our actual first date was great, and David turned out to be just as funny and interesting as he'd been during our accidental coffee meeting. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and the story of how we met became our favourite conversation starter at parties. 6 months later, we ran into Monica and Steve at a farmer's market downtown. They were holding hands and looked very happy together, and Monica immediately recognised me as the person who had stolen her friend's blind date. "You two are the reason I met Steve," she told us. "If you hadn't confused our whole setup, I never would have ended up talking to him." We all laughed about the mix-up and agreed that sometimes the best things happen when plans go completely wrong. Monica and Steve got married the following year, and David and I were invited to their wedding as the couple who had accidentally made their relationship possible. David and I got engaged 2 years after our mistaken identity coffee date, and we decided to get married at the same coffee shop where we'd first met. The owner let us reserve the entire place for the ceremony, and we even sat at the same table where we'd figured out we were supposed to be meeting other people. Our wedding invitations included the story of how we met, and our wedding favours were small bags of coffee beans with tags that said, "Sometimes the best meetings are unplanned." We still go back to that coffee shop on the anniversary of our first accidental date, and we always sit at the same table by the window. People always say we were meant to find each other, and maybe that's true. Or maybe we just got lucky that we both fit the same generic description and ended up in the right place at the right time to meet the wrong person who turned out to be exactly the right person. That story is over. The odds of 2 separate blind date mix-ups happening simultaneously in the same coffee shop are probably astronomical, but somehow it worked out perfectly for everyone involved. David and Lisa found each other by accident, and their original dates found each other the same way. Sometimes the universe has a better plan than the one you started with. Let's move to another story about being trapped in a small space with a stranger, which usually sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, but somehow became something much sweeter. OP shared this story about an elevator malfunction that turned into an extended first meeting with their future partner. "I was running late for a job interview on the 15th floor of this downtown office building. I'd already been stressed about the interview itself, and hitting traffic on the way there had made my anxiety even worse. I rushed into the building lobby and pressed the elevator call button about 6 times, as if that would somehow make it arrive faster. When the elevator doors opened, there was already someone inside, a woman about my age wearing a professional-looking dress and holding a portfolio folder. She looked like she might also be heading to some kind of business meeting, though she seemed significantly more calm and collected than I felt. "What floor?" she asked as I stepped in and tried to catch my breath from speed walking through the lobby. "15th, please," I said, checking my phone for the time and realising I now had exactly 3 minutes to get upstairs, find the right office, and somehow compose myself enough to make a good impression. She pressed the button for the 15th floor, then pressed the one for the 12th floor for herself. The doors closed, and we started ascending smoothly until we got to about the 8th floor, where the elevator suddenly lurched to a stop with a mechanical grinding sound that definitely didn't seem normal. We looked at each other, then at the floor display, which was flickering between 8 and 9, like it couldn't decide where we actually were. "That doesn't seem good," the woman said, pressing the call button on the elevator panel. "No, it really doesn't," I agreed, feeling my interview anxiety transform into elevator anxiety, which was somehow even worse. The emergency phone connected us to building maintenance, and a guy named Frank told us that there was some kind of mechanical issue with our elevator and that it would probably take about an hour to get us out safely. An hour. I was supposed to be in my interview in 2 minutes, and instead I was trapped between floors with a complete stranger. I called the company I was interviewing with and left a voicemail explaining that I was stuck in an elevator and would need to reschedule. The receptionist who called me back seemed amused by the excuse, like she thought I was making it up to avoid the interview. "This is a disaster," I said after hanging up. "I've been preparing for this interview for weeks, and now I'm going to look like either a liar or the most unlucky person in the city." I'm sure they'll understand, the woman said. I mean, getting stuck in an elevator is a pretty legitimate excuse. It's not like you said your dog ate your resume. I'm Mia, by the way, she said, extending her hand like we were meeting at a networking event instead of being trapped in a metal box. And I'm supposed to be presenting a marketing proposal to a client in about 10 minutes. So we're both having a day. I'm Ryan, I replied, shaking her hand. And at least your excuse sounds professional. I'm going to have to explain to a potential employer that I couldn't make it to an interview because I got trapped in their building's elevator. That's actually kind of poetic, Mia said. You were so eager to work there that you got stuck trying to reach them. Despite the situation, I found myself laughing. Mia had this way of finding humour in what was objectively a pretty stressful situation, and her calm energy was helping me feel less panicked about missing my interview. We settled in for what Frank had warned us would be a long wait. The elevator was spacious enough that we weren't cramped, but small enough that we were definitely sharing each other's personal space. Mia sat down on the floor with her back against one wall, and I sat across from her. So what kind of job were you interviewing for? She asked. Marketing coordinator position at a non-profit, I said. Nothing too exciting, but it would be a step up from what I'm doing now. What do you do now? I work at a call centre handling customer service for an insurance company, I said. It's exactly as soul-crushing as it sounds. Well, maybe getting stuck in this elevator is the universe telling you that you're meant for something better, Mia said. What kind of non-profit? I told her about the organisation, which focused on literacy programmes for underprivileged kids, and how I'd been volunteering with them on weekends for the past year. Mia's eyes lit up when I mentioned the education component. That's amazing, she said. I do marketing consulting mostly for small businesses, but I've been wanting to get involved with more meaningful work. Do they need any volunteer help with marketing? We spent the next 20 minutes talking about the non-profit and brainstorming ways Mia could potentially get involved. She had some really innovative ideas about social media campaigns and community outreach that I'd never thought of, and I found myself taking notes on my phone. You should definitely reach out to them, I said. Even if my interview doesn't work out, I could introduce you to the director. She's always looking for people who understand marketing and actually care about the cause. I'd love that, Mia said, and your interview will work out. Anyone who volunteers their weekends to help kids learn to read is exactly the kind of person they want to hire. So wahi sori mai. 40 minutes into our elevator adventure, we'd moved from talking about work to sharing stories about our families, our college experiences, and our respective dating disasters. Mia told me about a first date where the guy spent the entire evening talking about his extensive collection of vintage bottle caps, and I told her about a woman who brought her mother to our dinner date without mentioning it beforehand. At least you're stuck in here with someone who won't bore you with bottle cap trivia, Mia said. And at least I won't surprise you with any uninvited family members, I replied. We were both laughing when Frank's voice came through the emergency phone, announcing that they'd figured out the problem and would have us moving again in about 10 minutes. I was surprised to realise I felt a little disappointed that our elevator time was almost over. This has been the strangest morning of my life, I said, but also kind of the best. I know what you mean, Mia said. I was dreading that client meeting, and now I'm actually looking forward to getting back to work because I have some new ideas to think about. So, plus you might have a new volunteer opportunity to explore, I pointed out. True, she said. And you might have helped me find a way to do marketing work that actually matters. When the elevator finally started moving again, we both stood up and brushed off our clothes. Mia checked her makeup in the reflective elevator panel, while I tried to smooth down my hair and look presentable for whenever I managed to reschedule my interview. This is going to sound forward, Mia said as we reached the 12th floor. But would you want to get coffee sometime? I mean, after spending an hour trapped together, I feel like we know each other well enough to skip the small talk portion of getting acquainted. I'd really like that, I said, pulling out my phone to exchange numbers with her. Though I have to warn you, all my future dating stories are going to sound boring compared to meeting someone while stuck in an elevator. I think I can live with boring, Mia said. as the doors opened on her floor. "Good luck with your interview whenever you reschedule it." I rode up to the 15th floor and explained the situation to the receptionist, who turned out to be much more understanding in person than she'd sounded on the phone. They rescheduled my interview for the following week, and the hiring manager said she was impressed that I'd still come upstairs to explain what happened instead of just going home. Mia and I met for coffee that weekend, and she brought a whole folder of marketing ideas for the literacy non-profit. We spent 3 hours at the coffee shop talking through her concepts, and I realised she was not only creative and intelligent, but genuinely passionate about using her skills to help people. Our coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into a long walk through downtown, where we continued talking about everything from our career goals to our favourite books, to our theories about why elevator music is universally terrible. 2 weeks later, Mia had set up a meeting with the non-profit director and was already working on a volunteer marketing campaign. A month later, we were officially dating, and I had gotten the job I'd interviewed for, partly because I'd been able to talk enthusiastically about the marketing volunteer they'd recently acquired. 6 months after our elevator adventure, Mia had transitioned from volunteer to part-time consultant for the non-profit, and we were spending most of our free time working on literacy events together. A year later, she'd made the non-profit her primary client, and we'd moved in together. We got engaged 2 years after meeting in that elevator, and Mia insisted we take our engagement photos in the lobby of the building where we'd first been trapped together. The security guard remembered us and thought it was hilarious that we'd turned an elevator malfunction into a love story. Our wedding invitations had a little illustration of an elevator, and during the reception, Mia's maid of honor told everyone about how we'd met while stuck between floors. The story got huge laughs, and several people mentioned that they'd never heard of an elevator breakdown leading to a marriage before. We still work together on projects for the literacy non-profit, and whenever we're in an elevator together, one of us always jokes about hoping it gets stuck again. But honestly, we got everything we needed from that first hour trapped between floors. Sometimes the best connections happen when you're forced to slow down and actually talk to someone without any distractions or escape routes. That story is over. An hour trapped in an elevator could have been a nightmare scenario, but these two turned it into the world's most unconventional first date. The fact that they both ended up finding meaningful work connections through their chance meeting makes it even better. Sometimes being stuck in a small space with a stranger is exactly what you need to realize you don't want to be strangers anymore. Our next story proves that sometimes the most mundane shopping trips can turn into the most memorable meetings. OP wrote about a grocery store collision that somehow knocked more than just items off the shelves. I was having one of those grocery shopping days where everything on my list seemed to be in a different aisle than where I remembered it being. I'd already spent 20 minutes looking for pasta sauce and another 15 trying to find the specific brand of cereal I wanted, which apparently they'd stopped carrying since my last visit. I was pushing my cart toward the produce section, mentally reorganizing my shopping route to be more efficient, when disaster struck in the form of a display of canned tomatoes that some employee had built into an elaborate pyramid near the end of the aisle. I was checking my phone to see if I'd missed anything on my list, when my cart bumped into something solid. I looked up to see that I'd collided with another shopping cart, and the impact had somehow caused both of our carts to swerve directly into the tomato can display. Cans started falling everywhere, rolling across the floor and making that distinctive metallic clanging sound that immediately draws the attention of everyone within a 50-foot radius. It was like a very slow-motion avalanche of tomato products, and I was definitely the cause of it. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," I said to the owner of the other cart, a guy about my age who was standing there looking as horrified as I felt about the chaos we'd just created. "I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. It's okay," he said, already bending down to start gathering up the fallen cans. I think we both contributed to this disaster equally. I was texting and definitely not watching where I was pushing my cart either. I looked around at the mess we'd made. There were probably 30 cans scattered across the floor, and other shoppers were starting to detour around our accident scene. A store employee with a name tag that said Mark was already heading in our direction with a resigned expression. "We should probably pick these up before someone slips on them," I said, grabbing an armload of cans and trying to reconstruct the display we'd demolished. "Definitely," the guy agreed. "I'm Mark, by the way, and I promise I'm not usually this destructive when I go grocery shopping." "I'm Sarah," I replied, stacking cans as quickly as I could. "And same. This is a new low in terms of public embarrassment for me." Mark from customer service reached us just as we were finishing, gathering up the last of the fallen cans. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, surveying the scene. "We had a little cart collision," Mark, not the employee, explained. "But we're cleaning it up, and no cans were harmed in the making of this disaster." "It happens more often than you'd think," Mark, the employee, said with a grin. "Thanks for picking everything up. You two make a good cleanup crew." After Mark, the employee, left to deal with other grocery store emergencies, Mark, the customer, and I stood there, looking at our carts and laughing at how ridiculous the whole situation had been. "Well, that's probably the most excitement I'll have all week," Mark said, "and it's only Tuesday." "Same here," I said. "Though I have to ask, what were you texting about that was so important you crashed into a tomato display?" "My sister was asking me what kind of wine goes with the dinner she's making tonight," he said, pulling out his phone to show me the conversation. Apparently, it was urgent enough that I forgot how to steer a shopping cart. "What kind of dinner?" I asked. "Some kind of chicken dish with herbs," Mark said. I told her to just get whatever was on sale, but she's convinced there's a perfect wine pairing for everything. "There probably is," I said. "I'm not a wine expert, but I watch a lot of cooking shows, and they're always going on about matching wines to food." "Do you cook a lot?" Mark asked. "I try to," I said, gesturing to my cart full of ingredients for what I hoped would become actual meals. "I'm getting better at it. What about you?" "I'm decent with basic stuff," Mark said. "Nothing fancy, but I can make things that don't burn and actually taste like food." We ended up walking through the store together, comparing our shopping lists and sharing cooking tips. Mark was buying ingredients for meal prep for the week, and I was stocking up on supplies for a dinner party I was hosting over the weekend. "What kind of dinner party?" he asked as we debated the merits of different types of olive oil. "Just a few friends coming over," I said. "I'm trying out some new recipes I found online, which could either be amazing or a complete disaster." "What's the theme?" Mark asked. "Italian mostly," I said. "Pasta, bread, salad, something chocolate for dessert. Nothing too complicated, but hopefully impressive enough that people think I know what I'm doing." "That sounds really nice," Mark said. That sounds really nice," Mark said. "I'm actually terrible at hosting dinner parties. The last time I tried to make something fancy for friends, I ended up ordering pizza because I burned the main course." "What were you trying to make?" I asked. "Some kind of fish dish that looked simple in the recipe," he said. "Turns out there's a big difference between simple and foolproof when it comes to cooking." We finished our shopping together, and I found myself enjoying the company way more than I usually enjoyed grocery runs. Mark had this easy way of making conversation that made even debating the merits of different pasta shapes feel entertaining. As we were heading to the checkout lanes, Mark stopped and looked at me with this slightly nervous expression. "This might be weird since we just met by destroying a tomato display," he said, "but would you want to grab dinner sometime?" I promise I'll keep my phone in my pocket so I don't crash into any more food displays. "Sure," I said yes, and we exchanged numbers while standing in the checkout line with our respective groceries. The cashier who rang up my items asked if we were shopping together, and when we explained about the tomato incident, she laughed and said she'd seen the aftermath earlier. Our first date was at an Italian restaurant, where Mark confessed that he'd been nervous about suggesting Italian food since I'd mentioned my dinner party menu. I told him I was still learning and could use all the research I could get. 6 months later, Mark was helping me host dinner parties, and we'd become the couple who did all their grocery shopping together, mostly because we didn't trust either of us to navigate the store alone without causing some kind of incident. We got engaged a year later, and Mark proposed in the produce section of that same grocery store, right next to the tomato display that had brought us together. He'd arranged with the store manager to rebuild the exact same pyramid of cans so he could recreate the scene of our first meeting. Our wedding favours were small cans of tomatoes with labels that said "Love at First Crash" and the date of our grocery store collision. People still bring up our origin story whenever we go shopping with friends, and Mark always jokes that he's the only person he knows who found his wife by destroying store property. We've been married for 2 years now, and we still do our grocery shopping together every weekend. We've never had another cart collision, but we always stop by the tomato display to remember how we met. Sometimes, the best relationships start with making a mess together. That story is over. The fact that they turned a grocery store disaster into a romantic proposal location is peak commitment to your origin story. Most people would have just apologised and moved on, but these two decided that knocking over canned goods was the foundation of true love. Some couples meet cute, others meet while creating minor chaos in the produce section. Speaking of finding romance in unexpected places, this next story proves that sometimes losing something important can help you find something even better. OP shared this story about how misplacing their wallet led to meeting someone who changed their entire perspective on trust and kindness. I was having one of those perfect Saturday afternoons at Riverside Park, the kind where the weather is exactly right and everyone seems to be in a good mood. I'd brought a book and a coffee and claimed a spot on my favourite bench under this huge oak tree that provides perfect shade without blocking the view of the lake. I spent about 2 hours just reading and people watching, which is honestly my ideal way to spend a weekend afternoon. There were families with kids feeding ducks, couples walking the trails, and joggers doing their thing. It was peaceful and exactly what I needed after a stressful week at work. When I finally decided to head home, I gathered up my stuff and started walking toward the parking lot. I was about halfway to my car when I realised I didn't have my wallet. I checked all my pockets twice, then went back to the bench where I'd been sitting and searched the ground thoroughly. No wallet anywhere. I retraced my steps to the coffee cart where I'd bought my drink earlier, thinking maybe I'd left it there when I paid. The guy working the cart remembered me, but said he hadn't seen a wallet. I checked the public restroom, the path I'd walked, even asked a few people if they'd seen anything. Nothing. I was starting to panic because my wallet had everything in it. My driver's license, credit cards, insurance cards, about $60 in cash, and a bunch of photos that I couldn't replace. Plus, I had no way to get home, since my car keys were attached to my wallet keychain. I was sitting on a different bench trying to figure out what to do next when my phone rang. Unknown number, which I normally wouldn't answer, but given the circumstances I picked up. "Hi," said a woman's voice. "Is this Jessica Martinez?" "Yes," I said, wondering how someone had gotten my number. "I found your wallet at Riverside Park," she said. "I got your number from the emergency contact card you have in there. Are you still in the area?" I could have cried with relief. "Yes, I'm still at the park." "Where did you find it?" "It was under one of the picnic tables near the playground," she said. "I'm Sophie, by the way." I was there with my niece, and she spotted it when we were cleaning up after lunch. "Thank you so much," I said. "I've been looking everywhere for it. Where should I meet you?" Sophie suggested we meet by the main entrance, and when I got there, I saw a woman about my age standing next to a little girl who was maybe 7 or 8. Sophie had brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and was wearing jeans and a volunteer t-shirt from the local animal shelter. "Jessica?" she asked as I approached, and when I nodded, she handed me my wallet with a smile. Everything should still be in there. Emma and I didn't look through it or anything. Just found your emergency contact info. I opened the wallet and confirmed that everything was exactly where I'd left it. All my cards, the cash, even the photos were untouched. "I can't believe you found this and went to the trouble of calling me," I said. "Most people would have just turned it into lost and found, if they bothered at all." "I would have wanted someone to do the same thing for me," Sophie said simply. Plus, Emma insisted we had to find the owner because she said losing your wallet must be really scary. The little girl Emma nodded seriously. "My mum lost her purse once and she cried," she said. so we had to help. I looked between Sophie and Emma, feeling overwhelmed by their kindness. Can I at least buy you both ice cream or something? There's a cart over there, and I feel like I need to do something to thank you. Ice cream, Emma said immediately, looking at Sophie with hopeful eyes. You don't have to do that, Sophie said, but I could tell she was considering it because Emma was clearly excited about the possibility. Please, I said. It's the least I can do. You probably saved me hours of dealing with replacing cards and ID and all that bureaucratic nightmare stuff. We walked over to the ice cream cart together, and I bought Emma a cone with rainbow sprinkles and Sophie a simple vanilla cone. I got chocolate for myself, and we sat at a nearby picnic table while Emma told me about all the things she'd seen at the park that day. Are you her mum? I asked Sophie, while Emma was distracted by trying to catch drips from her ice cream. Aunt, Sophie said. I take her out on Saturdays to give my sister a break and to make sure Emma gets some outdoor time instead of just staying inside with video games. That's really sweet of you, I said. She seems like a great kid. She is, Sophie said, smiling as Emma attempted to pet a squirrel that had wandered close to our table. She's the one who spotted your wallet, actually. She has this thing about making sure everything is where it belongs. We ended up talking for almost an hour, while Emma played on the nearby playground equipment. Sophie told me she worked as a veterinary technician at a clinic downtown and volunteered with the animal shelter on weekends when she wasn't spending time with Emma. I told her I was a graphic designer and that I came to the park regularly to read and decompress from work stress. I can't believe I've never seen you here before, Sophie said. I bring Emma here almost every Saturday, and you said this is your usual spot. Maybe we've just been here at different times, I said, or maybe the universe was waiting for the right moment to introduce us, and that moment required me losing my wallet. Sophie laughed. That's a pretty elaborate setup for a meeting, but I guess it worked. When Emma finally got tired of the playground and came back to our table, she announced that she was ready to go home and watch a movie with her mum. We should probably head out too, Sophie said, standing up and gathering Emma's backpack and water bottle. Before you go, I said, feeling slightly nervous about what I was about to ask, would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? I mean, when you're not busy with Emma or saving other people's lost belongings. Sophie smiled. I'd like that, and I promise to keep track of my own wallet so you don't have to return the favour. We exchanged numbers and I walked them to Sophie's car, where Emma insisted on giving me a hug goodbye and making me promise to be more careful with my wallet in the future. Our first date was at a coffee shop near the veterinary clinic, where Sophie worked, and she told me more about her job and her volunteer work. I found out she'd been thinking about going back to school to become a full veterinarian and was saving money for the program. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and Sophie would bring Emma along sometimes when we went to outdoor events or family-friendly activities. Emma started referring to me as Sophie's friend Jessica, and would always ask if I'd lost anything else that needed finding. 8 months later, Sophie and I moved in together, and Emma started spending Saturday nights at our place sometimes, which meant our weekend park visits became a regular trio activity. We got engaged 2 years after the wallet incident, and Sophie proposed at the same picnic table where we'd shared ice cream that first day. She'd hidden the ring box in a fake wallet that she'd placed on the table, and when I opened it, expecting to see someone's lost ID, I found the engagement ring instead. Emma was there for the proposal, and she immediately started planning our wedding, including detailed suggestions about what kind of cake we should have, and whether we could have the ceremony at the park, so all the squirrels could attend. Our wedding invitations had a little illustration of a wallet with hearts coming out of it, and our wedding favours were small keychain wallets with our names and wedding date engraved on them. Emma was our flower girl and took her job very seriously, making sure every petal was exactly where it belonged. People always say I was lucky that Sophie found my wallet, but honestly, I think we were both lucky that Emma insisted they help a stranger instead of just minding their own business. Sometimes losing something you need leads to finding something you didn't even know you were looking for. That story is over. The image of a 7-year-old insisting they had to help, because losing your wallet must be scary, is absolutely heartwarming. Most people would have just dropped it at lost and found and called it good, but Sophie and Emma went out of their way to personally return it. The fact that Emma was involved in the proposal and wedding planning makes this feel like the most wholesome family origin story ever. Let's move to our next story, which takes place in one of the most universally dreaded locations, but somehow turned into something unexpectedly meaningful. OP wrote about how jury duty, usually considered a civic obligation to avoid at all costs, became the backdrop for meeting someone who'd make the whole experience worthwhile. I got the jury duty summons in the mail on a Tuesday, and like everyone else who's ever received one, my first reaction was to groan and immediately start thinking of excuses to get out of it. I had projects at work, plans for the weekend, and absolutely no desire to spend potentially weeks sitting in a courthouse listening to lawyers argue about things I didn't understand. But I'm also the kind of person who feels guilty about avoiding civic responsibilities. So I showed up at the courthouse that Monday morning with a book, my phone charger, and the resigned attitude of someone who is about to lose several days of their life to the legal system. The jury assembly room was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable chairs, and about 100 people who all looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. There was a vending machine that probably hadn't been restocked since the 1990s and a TV playing some morning talk show that nobody was actually watching. I found a seat near the window and settled in with my book, figuring I might as well try to make the best of the situation. The jury coordinator explained that we'd be called in groups throughout the day for various trials and that we should be prepared to wait until we were needed. About an hour into the waiting process, the guy sitting next to me closed his laptop and sighed in the way that suggested he was just as thrilled to be there as I was. "Good book?" he asked, nodding toward the novel I was reading. "It's okay," I said. "I brought it specifically for jury duty because I figured I'd have plenty of time to get through it." "Smart thinking," he said. "I brought work to do, but I can't concentrate with all the anxiety about potentially being selected for some trial that could last for weeks." "I'm Ryan, by the way," he said, extending his hand, "and I'm definitely overthinking this whole process." "I'm Sarah," I replied, shaking his hand. "And same. I keep imagining getting stuck on some complicated case that goes on forever." We started talking past the time, and I found out Ryan worked in finance and had been trying to get out of jury duty for months by claiming various work conflicts that hadn't been accepted by the court system. "What kind of work do you do?" he asked. "I'm a social worker," I said, which probably makes me seem like the kind of person who should be excited about civic duty and participating in the justice system. "And are you?" Ryan asked, grinning. "Not even a little bit," I admitted. "I spend enough time dealing with the legal system in my job." I was hoping to spend this week doing literally anything else. "What kind of social work?" Ryan asked, and I found myself telling him about working with families in crisis and helping kids navigate the foster care system. He listened with genuine interest and asked thoughtful questions about the challenges and rewards of the job. "That sounds incredibly difficult, but also really meaningful," he said. "I mostly help people manage their money, which is useful, but not exactly life-changing work." "Money management is important too," I said. "Financial stress can destroy families just as much as any other kind of crisis." We kept talking while groups of potential jurors were called and dismissed throughout the morning. Ryan told me about growing up in a small town and moving to the city for college, and I told him about my family and how I'd gotten into social work after volunteering with a literacy program in college. "Do you like living in the city?" he asked. "Most of the time," I said. "I like having access to museums and restaurants and different neighborhoods to explore. But sometimes I miss the quiet of smaller places." "I know what you mean," Ryan said. "I love the energy here, but it can be overwhelming when you never get a break from all the noise and activity." By lunchtime, neither of us had been called for jury selection, which meant we were free to leave the building for an hour. Ryan suggested we grab food together since we'd been talking all morning anyway. We found a small cafe near the courthouse and continued our conversation over sandwiches and coffee. Ryan told me about his weekend hiking trips and how he was training for a marathon, and I told him about the book club I'd joined and my attempts to learn how to garden in my tiny apartment. "You seem way too interesting to be stuck in jury duty all day," Ryan said. "This is probably the best conversation I've had in months." "Same here," I said. "Usually when I tell people I'm a social worker, they either get uncomfortable or start telling me about their family drama like I'm providing free therapy." "Well, I promise not to ask you to analyse my relationship with my parents," Ryan said, laughing. We headed back to the courthouse after lunch and spent the afternoon continuing our conversation while more groups of potential jurors were called and dismissed. Ryan and I started making quiet jokes about the other people in the room and speculating about what kinds of cases they might be selected for. "That woman over there definitely looks like she'd be great on a murder trial jury," Ryan whispered, nodding towards someone who was reading a true crime novel. "And that guy has been taking notes all day, like he's studying for the bar exam," I replied, indicating a man with a legal pad covered in writing. Around 4 o'clock they announced that the remaining jurors wouldn't be needed that day and should report back tomorrow morning. Ryan and I walked out of the courthouse together, both feeling like we'd somehow won the lottery by not being selected for anything yet. "Want to grab dinner?" Ryan asked as we stood on the courthouse steps. "I mean, we've already spent the entire day together, might as well keep the conversation going." I said yes, and we found a restaurant within walking distance, where we continued talking about everything from our favourite movies to our career goals, to our theories about why jury duty waiting rooms are designed to be as depressing as possible. "This has been the strangest day," I said, as we were finishing dinner. "I came here expecting to be miserable, and instead I've had one of the most interesting days I've had in months." "Same here," Ryan said. "I was dreading this whole process, but now I'm actually hoping we both get dismissed again tomorrow, so we can spend another day talking." We exchanged numbers before parting ways, and Ryan texted me that night to say he'd enjoyed meeting me and hoped we'd both survive another day of jury duty together. The next morning, we met at the courthouse entrance and went through the waiting process again. This time, Ryan brought coffee for both of us, and I brought pastries from a bakery near my apartment. We were finally called for jury selection on Wednesday afternoon, but fortunately, we were both dismissed during the initial questioning process. Ryan was eliminated because he knew someone involved in the case, and I was dismissed because of potential conflicts with my social work background. "Well, that's anticlimactic," Ryan said as we walked out of the courthouse for the final time. "But also kind of perfect," I said. "We got to meet and spend time together without having to sit through weeks of testimony about someone else's legal problems." "Would you want to get coffee this weekend?" Ryan asked. "Like voluntary coffee, not courthouse-mandated waiting room coffee?" Our first official date was at a coffee shop in my neighbourhood, and we picked up our conversation exactly where we'd left off in the jury assembly room. No awkward first date small talk, because we'd already covered most of the basics during our days of courthouse waiting. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and Ryan would joke that jury duty was the best matchmaking service he'd ever encountered. We'd meet for coffee or dinner and compare our experiences with civic obligations and whether either of us would ever volunteer for jury duty if given the choice. 8 months later, we moved in together, and Ryan started volunteering with a financial literacy program that worked with some of the same families I helped through social services. He said meeting me had made him want to find ways to make his work more meaningful. We got engaged 2 years after our jury duty meet-cute, and Ryan proposed in the cafe where we'd had our first voluntary meal together. He said he wanted to commemorate the place where we decided to keep seeing each other after our courthouse adventure was over. Our wedding invitations had a little illustration of a gavel and hearts, and during the reception, Ryan's best man told everyone about how we'd met while trying to avoid jury duty. The story got huge laughs, and several people mentioned that they'd never thought of jury duty as a dating opportunity before. We still joke about our civic duty bringing us together, and whenever either of us gets a jury summons now, The other person volunteers to come along for moral support. Though honestly, we both hope we never have to spend that much time in a courthouse waiting room again, even if it did lead to the best relationship either of us had ever had. That story is over. Two people bonding over their shared dread of jury duty and turning courthouse waiting time into an extended first date is honestly genius. Most people spend jury duty scrolling their phones or complaining, but these two turned civic obligation into a love story. Sometimes the universe uses the most mundane situations to bring the right people together at exactly the right moment. Moving on to our next story, which proves that sometimes the most romantic meetings happen when the lights go out and you're forced to actually talk to someone. OP shared this story about how a power outage in their apartment building led to discovering that their neighbour was someone worth knowing in the dark. I was having a perfectly normal Thursday evening, which means I was on my couch in pyjamas watching Netflix and eating leftover Chinese takeout directly from the container. It was about 8:30, and I was deep into the third episode of a show I'd been binge-watching when everything suddenly went dark. At first I thought maybe I'd accidentally hit something on my remote, or my TV had malfunctioned, but then I realised the digital clock on my cable box was also dark, along with every other light in my apartment. Power outage. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate to my kitchen and check if I had any actual flashlights or candles, because apparently I'm the kind of adult who owns 17 different streaming subscriptions but no emergency supplies. I found one flashlight with dying batteries and 3 candles that smelled like they'd been there since the previous tenant. I was sitting in my living room with my pathetic emergency lighting setup, trying to figure out what people did for entertainment before electricity, when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find my neighbour from across the hall, a woman I'd seen in passing but never actually talked to. She was holding a much more impressive flashlight and had what looked like a whole camping lantern tucked under her arm. "Hi," she said. "I'm Sarah from 4B. The power's out in the whole building and I wanted to check if anyone needed flashlights or anything. I have extras." "That's really thoughtful," I said, holding up my sad little flashlight with its dim, yellowish beam. "I'm Emma from 4A, and I clearly did not prepare for this situation very well." Sarah laughed and handed me a proper flashlight that actually illuminated things. "I grew up camping, so I tend to over-prepare for power outages. Do you have candles or anything?" 3 random candles that smell weird and probably date back to 2015, I admitted. "Want to come over to my place?" Sarah asked. "I have a bunch of battery-powered lanterns and some board games. Might be more fun than sitting alone in the dark." I accepted her invitation and followed her across the hall to an apartment that was identical to mine in layout but felt completely different. Where my place was furnished with whatever was cheapest and most convenient, Sarah's apartment had personality and actual decorative items that suggested she'd put thought into creating a home. "This is so much nicer than my place," I said, as she set up several lanterns that cast warm, ambient light throughout her living room. "I've been here for 3 years, Sarah said. I've had time to accumulate stuff and figure out what I actually like instead of just buying whatever's on sale." She had a whole selection of board games organised on a bookshelf, and we settled on Scrabble because it seemed like something that would take a while and didn't require too much concentration. "So what do you do?" Sarah asked as we were setting up the game board. "I work in marketing for a software company," I said. "Lots of emails and spreadsheets and meetings about things that could have been emails. What about you?" "I'm a nurse at the children's hospital downtown," Sarah said. "So I deal with sick kids and worried parents and way too much paperwork for a job that's supposed to be about helping people." "That sounds incredibly stressful, but also really meaningful," I said. "It can be both," Sarah agreed. "Some days are harder than others, but I love working with kids. They're usually more honest about how they're feeling than adults are." We played Scrabble by lantern light and talked about our jobs, our families, and how we'd both ended up living in the same building. Sarah had moved here after finishing nursing school because it was close to the hospital and she could walk to work. I'd found the place through a Craigslist ad and chosen it mostly because the rent was reasonable, and it had good internet for working from home. "Have you lived in the city long?" I asked. "About 4 years," Sarah said. "I grew up in a small town about 2 hours north of here, so the city was a big adjustment at first." "Do you like it here?" I asked. "Most of the time," she said. "I miss being able to see stars and having quiet places to think, but I love having access to museums and restaurants and different neighbourhoods to explore." 2 hours into our Scrabble game, Sarah was winning by a significant margin because apparently growing up camping also involved learning an extensive vocabulary of obscure words that are acceptable in Scrabble. "Where did you learn all these words?" I asked after she played QI for the third time. "My family played a lot of word games during camping trips," Sarah said. "Plus I read constantly, which helps with random vocabulary." "I should probably read more instead of just watching Netflix all the time," I said. "What kind of shows do you watch?" Sarah asked, and I found myself telling her about my latest binge-watching obsessions and my tendency to get emotionally invested in fictional characters. "I do the same thing," Sarah said. "I get way too attached to TV characters and then spend too much time reading theories about what's going to happen next." We discovered we had several. We ended up abandoning the Scrabble game halfway through and just talking by lantern light. Sarah told me about her nursing school experiences and some of the more memorable patients she'd worked with, while I shared stories about particularly ridiculous marketing campaigns I'd had to manage. "I can't believe people actually buy products based on some of the ads we create," I said. "Half the time, we're just making up problems that don't really exist so we can sell solutions." "That's kind of brilliant in a twisted way," Sarah said. "Create demand for something people didn't know they needed." "It pays the bills," I said. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm contributing anything meaningful to the world." "You're helping businesses connect with customers who might actually benefit from their products," Sarah pointed out. "That's not nothing." We kept talking until we heard voices in the hallway and realised the power had come back on. Suddenly all the lights in Sarah's apartment blazed to life and we both squinted at the sudden brightness. "Well, that was good timing," Sarah said, starting to pack up the Scrabble pieces, right when we were getting to the deep philosophical discussions about the meaning of our careers. "This has been really fun," I said, reluctant to end the evening now that my apartment was presumably functional again. I had no idea my neighbour was so interesting. "Same here," Sarah said. "We should have introduced ourselves months ago instead of waiting for a power outage to force us to meet." "Would you maybe want to have dinner sometime?" and I asked. "Like with electricity and actual cooking instead of board games by lantern light?" "I'd like that," Sarah said, though I have to say, this was probably the most unique first meeting I've ever had. We exchanged numbers, and I headed back to my apartment where all my electronics were humming back to life. I texted Sarah before I went to bed to thank her for the flashlights and the company, and she replied that it was the best power outage she'd ever experienced. Our first official date was at a restaurant in my neighbourhood, and we picked up our conversation exactly where we'd left off during the blackout. Sarah brought me a proper flashlight as a joke gift, saying I needed to be better prepared for future emergencies. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and Sarah would tease me about my complete lack of emergency preparedness. She gradually helped me stock my apartment with the kinds of supplies that responsible adults are supposed to have, like batteries and candles that don't smell like they're from a previous decade. 6 months later, we decided to move in together, combining Sarah's well-organised emergency supplies with my streaming subscriptions and take-out menus. We kept both apartments for a few months while we figured out whose lease to keep, but we spent most of our time in Sarah's place because it actually felt like a home. We got engaged 2 years after the blackout, and Sarah proposed during a planned power outage. She'd arranged with the building maintenance to shut off electricity to our floor for an hour, then set up lanterns throughout the apartment and asked me to marry her by the same warm light where we'd first really gotten to know each other. Our wedding had a subtle camping theme, with lanterns as centerpieces and s'mores as one of the dessert options. Sarah's family, who were all outdoorsy types, loved the theme and spent the reception telling stories about family camping trips and power outages they'd survived together. People always think it's funny that we met during a blackout, but honestly, it was perfect. We got to know each other without any distractions from phones or TV or the internet. Just two people talking by lantern light and discovering they actually enjoyed each other's company. That story is over. There's something so intimate about meeting someone by candlelight when the rest of the world has gone dark. Most people would have just waited alone in their apartments for the power to come back. But Sarah saw an opportunity to help a neighbour and ended up finding something much better than just lending a flashlight. Sometimes the universe uses power outages to force us to slow down and actually connect with the people around us. Let's move to another story about mistaken identity, which seems to be a surprisingly common theme in how couples meet. And this one involves some serious grocery store confusion. OP wrote about a case of mistaken employment that turned a simple shopping trip into something unexpectedly delightful. I was having one of those grocery shopping days where my list was completely disorganized and I couldn't remember where anything was located in the store. I'd been wandering around for 20 minutes trying to find bread, which should have been simple, but apparently they'd rearranged the entire store since my last visit. I was standing in what I thought was the bread aisle, but was actually the cleaning supplies aisle, staring at rows of laundry detergent and wondering how I'd gotten so turned around when someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Excuse me," said a guy about my age who was pushing a cart full of what looked like ingredients for several complete meals. "Do you know where I can find the bread?" He was tall with brown hair and wearing a blue polo shirt, and something about his polite, slightly lost expression made me want to help him, even though I was just as confused about the store layout as he apparently was. "I have no idea," I said, gesturing around at the cleaning products. "I've been looking for bread for the past 15 minutes and somehow ended up here instead. I think they redesigned this place specifically to confuse people." "Oh," he said, looking surprised. "I thought you worked here. You look like you know what you're doing, and you're standing so confidently in this aisle." I looked down at myself. I was wearing jeans and a plain green t-shirt, nothing that resembled a store uniform, but I guess I'd been standing there with enough authority that I appeared to be an employee who belonged in the cleaning supplies section. "Definitely don't work here," I said, laughing. "I'm just another lost customer trying to figure out where they moved everything. I'm Lucas, by the way." "I'm Mia," she replied, smiling. "And I'm relieved you're not an employee, because that means I don't have to be embarrassed about not knowing where anything is in a store I've been shopping at for 2 years." "Want to be lost together?" I suggested. "Maybe if we combine our confusion, we can figure out where they're hiding the bread." "That's actually a good strategy," Mia said. "Two confused people might equal one person who knows what they're doing." We started walking through the store together, comparing our shopping lists and trying to make sense of the new layout. Mia was shopping for what looked like a dinner party, with ingredients for several different dishes and a bottle of wine that suggested she was planning something more elaborate than my usual frozen dinner routine. "What are you making?" I asked, as we finally located the bread aisle, which was apparently next to the pharmacy now, for reasons that made no sense to either of us. "I'm having friends over for dinner tomorrow," Mia said, grabbing a loaf of French bread. "I'm trying out some new recipes I found online, which could either be amazing or a complete disaster." "That sounds ambitious," I said, selecting my usual sandwich bread. "I'm impressed by people who can cook for multiple people. I can barely manage to cook for myself without burning something." "It's mostly just following directions," Mia said, "although I did set off my smoke alarm making pasta last week, so maybe I shouldn't act like I know what I'm doing." We continued shopping together, and I found myself enjoying the company way more than I usually enjoyed grocery runs. Mia had this easy way of making conversation that made even discussing the merits of different types of olive oil feel entertaining. "So what do you do when you're not getting lost in grocery stores?" I asked, as we waited in the produce section for someone to weigh Mia's vegetables. "I'm a teacher," she said. "Third grade, so I spend my days explaining basic math and trying to convince 8-year-olds that reading is actually fun." "Do you like it?" I asked. Most days, she said, kids are honest and funny, and they get excited about things that adults take for granted. Plus, I get summers off, which is nice for someone who likes to travel. Where do you like to travel? I asked. Anywhere with good food and interesting architecture, Mia said. I went to Italy last summer and spent 2 weeks eating my way through different regions and taking pictures of old buildings. I told her about my job in IT support and how I'd been thinking about taking a vacation somewhere that didn't involve fixing other people's computer problems. We ended up talking about travel destinations and favourite foods while we finished our shopping. This has been the most pleasant grocery shopping experience I've had in years, Mia said, as we were heading toward the checkout lanes. Usually, I just rush through with my list and try to get out as quickly as possible. Same here, I said, though I have to admit I'm still not entirely sure where half the stuff in this store is located now. Want to grab coffee sometime? Yeah, Mia asked as we were loading our groceries onto the checkout conveyor belt. I mean, we've already spent an hour wandering around a grocery store together, so we know we can handle extended periods of mild confusion. I said yes immediately, and we exchanged numbers while the cashier rang up our respective items. Mia texted me before I even got to my car to say she'd enjoyed meeting me and hoped I wouldn't get lost trying to find my way home. Our first date was at a coffee shop near the school where Mia worked, and she told me more about teaching and dealing with parents who thought their 8-year-olds were gifted geniuses. I told her about the more ridiculous tech support calls I'd handled, and how people seem to think computers should work like magic instead of following logical rules. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and grocery shopping became our weekly date activity. We'd meet at the store on Sunday mornings and shop together, with Mia planning elaborate meals while I contributed my expertise in finding the most efficient frozen dinner options. 8 months later, we moved in together, and Mia started teaching me how to actually cook instead of just reheating things in the microwave. She was patient with my complete lack of kitchen skills and only laughed at me a little when I managed to burn water. We got engaged 2 years after our grocery store meeting, and I proposed in the same aisle where we'd first started talking. I'd arranged with the store manager to put up a temporary sign that said, "Will you marry me?" next to the cleaning supplies, and Mia said yes while laughing at how ridiculous the whole setup was. Our wedding favours were small bottles of olive oil with labels that said, "Thanks for helping us find our way," and our wedding cake was decorated with little grocery carts and shopping lists. Mia designed the decorations herself because she said I couldn't be trusted not to accidentally order the wrong cake. People always laugh when we tell them we met because I thought she worked at a grocery store, but it's true. Sometimes the best relationships start with a simple misunderstanding and the willingness to be confused together until you figure things out. That story is over. The confidence of someone standing in the wrong aisle, looking like they belong there, is honestly impressive. Most people would have just asked an actual employee for help, but Lucas saw someone who seemed to know what they were doing and decided to take a chance. Sometimes the best connections happen when you're both lost and willing to admit it to each other. Moving on to our next story, which involves the kind of seating mix-up that usually leads to awkward apologies but somehow turned into something much more interesting. OP shared this story about a train journey that started with confusion over seat assignments and ended with much more than just finding the right place to sit. I was taking the train from Chicago to Milwaukee for my cousin's wedding, and I'd splurged on a reserved seat because I wanted to make sure I had somewhere comfortable to sit during the 3-hour journey. I'd booked seat 14B weeks in advance and was looking forward to reading my book and maybe getting some work done on my laptop. I found my car and walked down the aisle looking for row 14, carrying my weekend bag and a coffee I'd bought at Union Station. When I got to row 14, there was already someone sitting in what I was pretty sure was my seat. She was maybe 25, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater, and she was completely absorbed in whatever she was reading on her tablet. I checked my ticket again to make sure I had the right seat number, then cleared my throat politely. "Excuse me," I said, "I think you might be in my seat." "I have 14B. She looked up from her tablet with a confused expression then pulled out her own ticket. "That's weird," she said. "I have 14B too." We both stared at our tickets for a moment, trying to figure out how two people could have the same seat assignment. My ticket clearly said 14B, and when she showed me hers, it said exactly the same thing. "This is bizarre," she said. "That's weird," she said. "I have 14B too." We both stared at our tickets for a moment, trying to figure out how two people could have the same seat assignment. My ticket clearly said 14B, and when she showed me hers, it said exactly the same thing. "This is bizarre," she said. "I've never had this happen before." "Same here," I said. "Should we call the conductor or something?" "I'm Amanda," she said, standing up to make room while we figured out the seating situation. "And I'm really sorry if I'm in your seat." "I'm Chris," I replied, "and don't apologise yet." We still don't know whose seat this actually is. Amanda flagged down a passing conductor who looked at both our tickets with a kind of weary expression that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with duplicate seat assignments that day. "Computer glitch," he said, after examining our tickets. "Happens sometimes when people book online at the exact same time. One of you can take 15A, which is empty, or you can figure out some other arrangement." Amanda and I looked at the empty seat across the aisle, then at each other. "You can have 14B, I said. "I don't mind moving." "Actually," Amanda said, "would you want to just sit together? I mean, we're both going to Milwaukee anyway, and it seems silly to make a big deal about which specific seat we're in." I agreed, and we settled into seats 14A and 14B like we'd planned it that way. Amanda went back to reading on her tablet while I pulled out my laptop, but within a few minutes we were talking instead of focusing on our respective activities. "What brings you to Milwaukee?" she asked. "My cousin's wedding," I said. "Family obligation that I'm actually looking forward to for once. What about you?" "Work conference," Amanda said. 3 days of presentations about marketing trends that will probably put me to sleep by noon tomorrow." "That sounds rough," I said. "What kind of marketing do you do?" "Digital marketing for non-profit organisations," she said. "So I help charities figure out how to use social media and online advertising to reach donors and volunteers." "That actually sounds really interesting," I said. "Way more meaningful than what I do." "What do you do?" Amanda asked. "I work in software development," I said. "Mostly apps for businesses to manage their inventory and payroll. Useful, but not exactly changing the world." We kept talking as the train pulled out of Chicago and started making its way through the Illinois countryside. Amanda told me about some of the non-profits she worked with and the challenges of marketing for organisations that didn't have big advertising budgets. I told her about the apps I'd worked on and how satisfying it was when you finally solved a programming problem that had been driving you crazy for weeks. "Do you travel a lot for work?" I asked. "More than I'd like to," Amanda said. "Usually it's just day trips to meet with clients, but conferences like this one require overnight stays in hotel rooms that all look exactly the same." "At least you get to see different cities," I said. "True," she said, "but most of the time I see the inside of conference centres and airport terminals. Not exactly the glamorous travel lifestyle people imagine." An hour into the trip, we'd moved from work talk to more personal conversation. Amanda told me about growing up in a small town in Iowa and how she'd moved to Chicago for college and never left. I told her about my family and how I'd ended up in software development, almost by accident, after changing my major 3 times in college. "What did you originally want to study?" she asked. "Architecture," I said. I had this idea that I'd design beautiful buildings and leave some kind of lasting mark on the world. Turns out I'm better with code than I am with blueprints. "Do you ever regret not sticking with it?" Amanda asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I like problem solving, and programming is basically just solving puzzles all day. Plus, the job market for software developers is way better than it is for architects." "That's practical," Amanda said, "though it sounds like you still think about the what if sometimes." "What about you?" I asked. "Did you always want to work in marketing?" "Not exactly," she said. "I studied communications in college because I didn't know what else to do, and marketing was just where I ended up. but working with non-profits has made it feel more purposeful than just selling products people don't need. 2 hours into the trip, we were deep in conversation about everything from our favourite books to our theories about why train travel was more civilized than flying. Amanda had a way of asking questions that made me think about things from different angles, and I found myself telling her stories I hadn't shared with anyone in years. "This is going to sound weird," Amanda said as we were approaching Milwaukee, "but this has been the best train ride I've ever taken. Usually, I just read or work the whole time." "Same here," I said. I was dreading 3 hours of sitting still, but this went by really fast. "Would you want to get dinner sometime?" Amanda asked as the train was pulling into the station. "I mean, when we're both back in Chicago and not dealing with weddings and work conferences?" I said yes immediately, and we exchanged numbers while gathering our bags and preparing to disembark. Amanda texted me before I even made it to my cousin's rehearsal dinner to say she'd enjoyed meeting me and hoped the wedding was fun. Our first official date was at a restaurant near Amanda's apartment, and we picked up our conversation exactly where we'd left off on the train. No awkward first date silences, because we'd already covered most of the getting to know you basics during our accidental seat sharing. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and train travel became our thing. Instead of driving or flying when we took weekend trips, we'd look for train routes and spend the journey talking and watching the scenery go by. 8 months later, Amanda got a promotion that required less travel, which meant more time for weekend adventures and fewer nights spent in identical hotel rooms. A year after our train meet cute, we moved in together into an apartment that was convenient to both our offices and had good access to Union Station. We got engaged 2 years later on the exact same train route where we'd met, in seats 14A and 14B that I'd specially requested when booking our tickets. Amanda said yes while laughing about how we'd turned a seating mix-up into a proposal location. Our wedding invitations had a little illustration of a train, and our wedding favours were vintage-style luggage tags with our names and wedding date. During the reception, my best man told everyone about how we'd met because of a computer glitch that gave us the same seat assignment. People always say we were meant to find each other, and maybe that's true. Or maybe we just got lucky that a booking system error forced two strangers to sit together and actually talk for 3 hours instead of just staring at our phones. That story is over. A computer glitch turning into a 3-year relationship is the kind of random chance that makes you believe in fate. Most people would have just taken the other seat and never spoken to each other, but these two decided to make the best of an awkward situation. Sometimes the universe uses technical difficulties to bring the right people together at exactly the right moment. Speaking of technology bringing people together, this next story takes us into the world of online gaming where voice chat can lead to much more than just coordinating team strategies. OP wrote about meeting someone through an online game and how their virtual partnership became something very real. I've been playing this multiplayer strategy game for about 6 months, mostly solo, because I didn't know anyone else who was into it, and I'm not great at making friends with random people online. The game had a feature where you could get matched with other players for cooperative missions, and most of the time it was fine, but nothing particularly memorable. One Thursday evening, I got matched with someone whose username was ChloeStar92, and right away, I could tell this player actually knew what they were doing. Instead of charging ahead without any strategy like most random teammates did, she was coordinating moves and communicating through the game's voice chat system. "Okay, I'm going to flank left while you draw their attention from the front," she said, and her voice was clear and confident, like she'd done this 100 times before. "Sounds good," I replied, though I was slightly nervous because I wasn't used to playing with someone who seemed so competent. Most of my random teammates just ran around shooting at things without any real plan. We completed the mission perfectly, working together like we'd been playing as a team for months instead of having just met in a random matchmaking system. When the mission ended, instead of just moving on to find new teammates, Chloe sent me a friend request. "Want to do another one?" she asked through voice chat. "You actually listen to strategy instead of just doing whatever you want." Sure, I said, accepting her friend request. I was about to log off, but that was actually fun. We ended up playing for another 2 hours, completing mission after mission with the kind of coordination that usually only comes from playing with the same person regularly. Chloe had this way of thinking about the game strategically that made every mission feel like solving a puzzle together. Where did you learn to play like this? I asked during a break between missions. I used to play competitive esports in college, she said. Nothing too serious, but enough to learn that teamwork beats individual skill every time. That's impressive, I said. I just play for fun after work to decompress from dealing with spreadsheets all day. What kind of work do you do? Chloe asked. Accounting, I said. Very exciting stuff involving tax codes and expense reports. What about you? I'm a graphic designer, she said. I work for a small marketing firm, mostly doing websites and brochures for local businesses. We started playing together regularly after that, usually a few nights a week for a couple hours at a time. Our gaming sessions became the highlight of my week, not just because we were good at the game together, but because talking to Chloe during breaks between missions was genuinely enjoyable. Over the next few months, our conversations expanded beyond just game strategy. Chloe would tell me about difficult clients and design projects she was working on, and I'd complain about particularly annoying audit requirements and co-workers who didn't understand how spreadsheets worked. Do you ever think it's weird that we know so much about each other, but have never actually met? Chloe asked one night, after we'd been playing together for about 4 months. A little, I admitted, but also kind of cool. Like we became friends based on actually enjoying each other's company, instead of just because we happened to be in the same place at the same time. That's true, she said. Most of my friendships started because we worked together, or lived near each other, or something like that. This feels more intentional. 6 months into our gaming partnership, Chloe mentioned that she was planning to attend a gaming convention that was happening in my city. She said several of the game developers would be there, and she wanted to check out some of the new releases that were being previewed. Would you want to meet up while I'm in town? She asked, and I could hear the slight nervousness in her voice that suggested this was something she'd been thinking about for a while. Definitely, I said. It would be weird not to meet after all this time talking. We arranged to meet at the convention centre on Saturday afternoon, and I have to admit I was more nervous about meeting Chloe in person than I'd been about anything in months. What if we didn't get along as well face to face? What if the friendship we'd built through gaming didn't translate to real life? I found her at the booth she'd mentioned, looking at a demo of some new strategy game. She was shorter than I'd imagined, with dark hair and wearing a t-shirt from a game we'd played together. When she saw me approaching, she smiled with the same confident energy I'd gotten used to hearing in her voice. You look exactly like I pictured, she said, giving me a hug like we were old friends instead of people meeting for the first time. Same here, I said, though honestly, I'd been terrible at imagining what she looked like and had been slightly worried about recognizing her in a crowd. We spent the entire day at the convention together, checking out new games, attending panels about game development, and talking constantly about everything from the games we'd played together, to our jobs, to our theories about why certain game mechanics worked better than others. This is so much better than going to conventions alone, Chloe said, as we were checking out a booth full of vintage arcade games. I usually just walk around by myself and leave early because it gets boring. Same here, I said, though I have to admit I was nervous about meeting you in person. I was worried it might be weird after only knowing each other through voice chat. It's not weird at all, Chloe said. If anything, it feels like hanging out with someone I've known for years. When the convention ended, we went to dinner at a restaurant near the convention centre and continued talking about games, work, and our respective experiences with online friendships. Chloe told me about other gaming friends she'd made over the years, and how most of them had faded away when people got busy with other things. I hope that doesn't happen with us, she said. This has been the best gaming partnership I've ever had. Me too, I said, though now I'm going to be distracted during missions because I'll be picturing you actually sitting at your computer instead of just hearing your voice. Chloe laughed. Is that going to mess up our strategy? Probably, I said, but I think I'll manage. We exchanged phone numbers and started texting regularly in addition to our gaming sessions. When Chloe got back home, we'd send each other photos of things that reminded us of games we'd played or inside jokes we'd developed during our months of playing together. 3 months later, I visited Chloe's city for a weekend, and she showed me around her favourite coffee shops and art galleries. 6 months after that, we were officially dating long distance, with regular visits and daily phone calls in addition to our gaming sessions. A year later, Chloe got a job offer with a design firm in my city and decided to move. We found an apartment together that had enough space for both of our gaming setups, and we started hosting game nights for other local players we'd met through online communities. We got engaged 2 years after meeting at that gaming convention, and I proposed during one of our regular gaming sessions. I'd worked with the game developers to create a custom mission where the objective was for Chloe to find an engagement ring hidden in the virtual world. Our wedding had subtle gaming themes in the decorations, and several of our online gaming friends travelled to attend the ceremony. Chloe's maid of honour mentioned in her speech how we'd met through teamwork and strategy, which was probably the foundation for any good relationship. People sometimes think it's strange that we met through a video game, but honestly, it makes perfect sense to us. We got to know each other based on how we communicated, solved problems together, and handled both success and failure as a team. Those are probably better foundations for a relationship than just physical attraction or shared location. That story is over. Building a relationship through months of strategic teamwork and voice chat is actually kind of brilliant. They got to know each other's communication style and problem-solving approach before physical appearance or location ever became factors. Most online gaming partnerships end when people log off, but these two turned virtual collaboration into real-world romance. Let's move to a story that brings us back to the physical world, where sometimes the simplest accidents lead to the most meaningful connections. OP shared this story about how being clumsy on a college campus turned into the beginning of something beautiful with someone who was kind enough to help a stranger pick up their scattered belongings. I was having one of those mornings where everything felt rushed and chaotic. I'd overslept, barely made it to my first class on time, and was now speed walking across campus, trying to get to my second class with about 3 minutes to spare. My backpack was loaded with textbooks, my laptop, notebooks, and various supplies that I probably didn't need, but carried anyway because I was perpetually over-prepared for everything. I was cutting across the quad, checking my phone to see if I had enough time to grab coffee before my next lecture, when disaster struck in the form of an uneven piece of sidewalk that I completely failed to notice. My foot caught on the raised edge, and I went down hard, sending everything in my arms flying across the walkway. Books scattered in every direction, papers started blowing away in the breeze, and my laptop bag landed with a concerning thud about 6 feet away from where I was now sitting on the ground, feeling like an idiot. Students were walking around me, some glancing over with mild concern, but mostly just continuing on their way to wherever they were going. I was still sitting there taking inventory of the damage when someone crouched down next to me and started gathering up my scattered belongings. "Are you okay?" he asked, handing me a textbook that had landed near his feet. That looked like it hurt. "Just my pride," I said, accepting the book and trying to get to my feet without falling over again. And possibly my laptop, depending on how hard it hit the ground. He was probably about my age, tall with brown hair and wearing a backpack that suggested he was also a student. He had this genuine, concerned expression that made me feel less embarrassed about face planting in the middle of campus. "I'm Nathan," he said, continuing to collect my papers and notebooks while I brushed dirt off my jeans and tried to assess whether anything was broken. "I'm Claire," I replied, checking my phone to see how much time I had left to get to class. "And thank you for helping." Most people would have just walked around the disaster zone and pretended not to see me. "Are you kidding?" Nathan said, handing me my laptop bag. I trip over my own feet at least twice a week. I know the struggle. I opened the laptop bag and was relieved to find that my computer appeared to have survived its brief flight across the sidewalk. My notebooks were slightly bent, and I was probably missing some papers that had blown away. But overall, the damage was less catastrophic than it could have been. "Where are you trying to get to?" Nathan asked, noticing me checking the time again. "Psychology building," I said. "I have a lecture in about 2 minutes, which means I'm definitely going to be late." "I'm heading that way too," he said. "Want to walk together? I can help carry some of your stuff in case you trip again." "That's really nice of you," I said, "but I think I can manage not to fall down twice in one morning." "Famous last words," Nathan said, grinning, "but I'll take the risk." We started walking toward the psychology building together, and Nathan insisted on carrying my laptop bag, despite my protests that I was perfectly capable of not dropping it again. "What's your major?" I asked as we walked. "Computer science," he said. "Lots of late nights staring at code and trying to figure out why programs don't work the way they're supposed to. That story's over. Something about meeting someone by helping you collect your scattered dignity, along with your textbooks, just hits different." Nathan saw someone having a rough moment and chose kindness instead of walking past like everyone else. Those small acts of decency often reveal exactly the kind of person someone really is. And that brings us to the end of tonight's collection of stories about the wonderfully weird ways people find each other. If you enjoyed these, let me know in the comments. There's a ton more out there on the internet. And be sure to subscribe for more stories just like these as well. Thanks for winding down with me tonight, and I will see you again tomorrow.